Georgia, no surprise there. In the state of Virginia, we now rate that race too close to call. The polls having just closed. We're basing this on exit poll information, of course. In South Carolina for president, that race is still too close to call, we believe. In Kentucky, however, we project President Bush the winner in that state. We project the winner as well in the state of Indiana. And we project John Kerry the winner in the state of Vermont. You should know, by the way, you're watching election night coverage on the Fox News Channel.
Decide 2004 Election Night, anchored by Britt Hume, with Chris Wallace and the latest Fox News exit polls. Political analysis by contributors Fred Barnes, Mort Kondraty, Juan Williams, Bill Crystal, Michael Barone, and Susan Estrich. Ballot initiatives and legal issues reported by Greta Van Susteren and Judge Andrew Napolitano. Election return updates from Martha McCallum, plus live reports from around the country from the Fox News political team. Now, live from the Fox News election headquarters in New York, Britt Hume.
Good evening. With polls closed in 6 states, it is already a busy night. Beside the early returns from the presidential races that we have just showed you a moment or two ago, we do have some Senate and gubernatorial races to report. Let's take a look at them. In Georgia, we report the winner there will be Johnny Isakson. He's the Republican. That is the Zell Miller seat. That is a pickup for the Republicans. Zell Miller, of course, was a Democrat. In South Carolina, this is the race between Jim DeMint, the Republican, Isaias Tenenbaum, the Democrat. That race at this hour is too close to call. Similarly, in Kentucky, where the incumbent Jim Bunning has had the race of his life from the Democrat there, Monjardo. That race is too close to call. Early count you see in there favoring Monjardo, still well too close to call that. In Indiana, we project the incumbent Democratic popular Senator Evan Bayh, a winner there. And we can't say the margin, it's now 68%, but that's just getting us started here. And as well in Vermont, Pat Leahy, veteran Democratic incumbent, the winner there. Only one of those is a gain or a pickup, and that is the seat in Georgia, a pickup for the Republicans there. In addition, gubernatorial races, we rate this between this race here in Indiana between Mitch Daniels and his Democratic opponent too close to call. Similarly, in Vermont, we're looking at the race there, and that gubernatorial race we also believe to be too close to call. As the presidential race unfolds across the United States tonight, our Fox News analysts here in the studio will be with me looking for important developments that could tip the vote to President Bush or Senator Kerry. Here are the keys to victory from each of our panel.
The two keys to victory are very different issues. Key number one, 9/11. The terrorist attacks on New York and Washington and the war on terror must be fresh in voters' minds if Bush is to win. Key number two, same-sex marriage. For Bush to gain a second term, a sizable number of Democrats must vote against gay marriage and then cross party lines and vote for President Bush as well.
The keys to victory for me are turnout and lawyers. Both sides have left nothing to chance. They've registered millions of new voters. They contacted them after they've registered them. They've gotten them to the polls. Last election, there were 55% of the eligible voters turned out. If this election is up in the 59 to 60% range, that should be good for Kerry. If it's a very close election, lawyers take over. The election will resemble a celebrity divorce case, with the lawyers urging their clients not to give anything to the other side, and of course they'll have teams of publicists as well to stir up the pot. And the ultimate lawyers to decide this case could be at the United States Supreme Court.
The keys to victory tonight are also the keys to defeat. The first is George W. Bush. He's the incumbent. No matter how much he and his surrogates have tried to put the focus on John Kerry, this election has always been and will be tonight a verdict on the incumbent president, George W. Bush. The second key is the mainstream media. Media coverage of Kerry in October has been overwhelmingly positive. Media coverage of Bush unprecedentedly negative. If Bush loses, the mainstream media can take some of the credit or some of the blame.
My two keys to victory, voter suppression and religion. Religion because in the 2000 election, evangelicals didn't turn out in the numbers that Republicans had anticipated. Have they turned out tonight? The second key, voter suppression. Democrats and lawyers up in arms, questioning whether or not GOP tactics are intimidating voters, keeping them away from the polls in the midst of the aftermath of emotion that surrounded the 2000 race and charges of voter suppression. Has intimidation, voter suppression been an issue today? Again, it's a key to victory for election 2004.
As noted in the final days of the campaign, the race tonight will come down mostly to just a few swing states. Let's take a look at them. And Ohio, a critical state there. That was a Bush state in 2000, and it is one which no Republican has ever been elected without winning. Right. Well, that's obviously critical there. Really critical to both candidates. That is one critical state which we'll be keeping a close eye on. Another, of course, is Florida. This is another state that President Bush won by, as we all know now, the narrowest of margins 4 years ago. It's got 27 electoral votes. It is a big prize. It is critical to George W. Bush. Pennsylvania, this is a state Al Gore won, which John Kerry will very much need to hold on to. Should he lose it for any reason, and we may know early because the polls close relatively early in Pennsylvania, that would spell serious trouble for him. Iowa is a state also won by Al Gore 4 years ago, though narrowly. It is one that the Bush camp has felt that it has a good chance of winning this time. Only 7 electoral votes, but they could help offset a loss in Ohio or Florida. Wisconsin, another state won by Al Gore. John Kerry hoping very much to hold on to it. 10 electoral votes. It'd be a nice pickup for the Republicans, and the president has polled well, very well there in the closing days of the campaign. Similarly, in Minnesota, this is a state that it's kind of hard to imagine a Republican winning in anything but a landslide, nationwide landslide. But the president hasn't done badly there in recent polls. John Kerry actually stopped in there in the final days, signaling his desire to hold on to it. A state, of course, won by Al Gore. New Mexico, another one. The president lost that by something like 350 votes 4 years ago, and it's a place where he's been back to many times. John Kerry's been there to try to defend it as well. 5 electoral votes in play there. Also, Colorado, another red state, won handily by the president 4 years ago, or more handily than it seemed in the early part of that night when it looked like he was doing badly. He will need to win and hold that state as well tonight. Those are states we'll be watching very closely, as well as New Hampshire, a state that has kind of trended Democratic in recent elections, although the president won it 4 years ago, and it was a pickup, as I recall, for him because Bill Clinton had won it, I guess, twice. West Virginia, another one-time perennial for the Democrats, won by the president 4 years ago. I don't think John Kerry has been to West Virginia in some time, so we can calculate that that is a state that he may have given up on, but nobody knows until the votes are counted. In the meantime, as Juan Williams mentioned earlier today, this question of voter suppression is competing for the attention of the public with the question of voter fraud. And one person who has been keeping an eye on that for us for some weeks and is doing so tonight is my colleague in Washington, Major Gadd. Major?
Well, Britt, our first report tonight is not about the issue of regularities, but the process of counting absentee ballots. And wouldn't you know, the focus of our attention, at least this hour, brings us back to that familiar electoral stomping ground in presidential campaigns, Florida. Now, Republican operatives tell Fox a couple of things. One, several Florida counties will not count all the absentee ballots tonight. That's because there's such large turnout they don't have time. Now, Republicans say they have about a 130,000 vote advantage in the absentee balloting. Not counting these ballots tonight, the Republicans fear, could skew projections by the media tonight of who actually carries Florida. Here's a discrete example. Miami-Dade County officials have told Fox tonight that it will not finish counting all the absentee ballots until Thursday at the earliest. There may be as many as 95,000 absentee ballots in that county alone yet to be counted. And the Republicans tell us that they believe they have a partisan advantage of 2-to-1 in their favor in that one county alone, meaning 60 to 65,000 votes for Bush could go uncounted tonight and uncounted Wednesday night in that one county. And Republicans say that's an issue we should all keep in mind as the process of counting votes in Florida and possibly other states, at least absentee ballots, goes on throughout the evening. Britt?
Thanks, Major. Nowhere is this race going to be watched more closely tonight, of course, than at campaign headquarters for the president, chief political correspondent. Excuse me. We got our guys at 2 places. Carl Cameron is at Kerry headquarters. Jim Angle is at Bush headquarters. We're going to check in first with Jim Angle. Jim?
Hello, Brett. Well, the Bush campaign is obviously concerned about these absentee ballots in Florida. They say actually that they have 154,000 vote advantage on this. Now, that's possible to know because in Florida, when you get an absentee ballot, it is done by party affiliation, so they know how many Republicans, more Republicans there are than Democrats. They have at least 154,000 vote advantage, perhaps more than that because there were many that came in the last few days that they were unable to count. The backup on the counting in this is obviously because the balloting has been, there's been such a crush of balloting, and the problem would be if there were a very tight race in Florida and John Kerry showed ahead, then you would not be able to determine the winner if in fact there were an advantage for President Bush in the absentee ballots, which won't be counted until later in the week. That raises questions about whether or not you can have a firm result in Florida until Thursday at the earliest, until those votes are counted. So that is the problem they face, and that is something that is of enormous concern here. They are in touch with the Secretary of State and the governor to try to get clarifications on when those votes will be counted. Britt?
Well, Jim, I can't tell you what wonderful news that is as we sit here tonight hoping that at some reasonable hour we might all be able to go home. And, of course, for your poor colleague, Carl Cameron, who, like, you know, these Democratic candidates for president love to hold outdoor events on election night. Bill Clinton did it over and over again. And as you can see from the looking at Carl Cameron, everybody, with his top coat and his scarf on, he is outdoors in Boston tonight. We hope it won't be Thursday afternoon before we can turn you loose, Carl, but give us a fill on what it all looks like from the Kerry camp's point of view tonight.
Let's not forget we're here in Boston where it's going to be chilly, but 4 years ago we were in Austin where it was 40 degrees and horizontal rain. It was pretty cold down there in Texas 4 years ago, too. A real contrast in mood here between what Jim was describing and the concerns of the Bush-Cheney campaign and what the Kerry aides have been talking about in terms of the Kerry-Edwards campaign. They point out that ever since this morning, Senator Kerry and top aides have been saying, look, we don't have to worry about voter irregularities. We hope that this isn't going to end up in the courts. We hope that there will be a clean decision tonight. Very much optimistic for somewhat speedy closure on this, and that's driven in large measure by their growing confidence based upon the information, both anecdotal and statistical, that they see coming out. The Kerry campaign believes that they have an almost unprecedented ground game going, particularly in Ohio and Florida. In talking with the two top operatives from the Kerry campaign in both of those states, what they outline is an absolutely huge ground force. More than 27,000 volunteers in Ohio alone today working the polls, 3,200 lawyers and paralegals who've been standing by for the last 72 hours in advance of this and will presumably be watching right up until the polls close and then move to the courthouses if that's what's necessary. A huge component of volunteers and Democrats doing the exact same thing in Florida. The Kerry campaign said it all along that we are not going to allow what happened last time to happen this time. This is a reference to their view that the election in 2000 was disputed and perhaps even illegitimate in the victory in some minds for Democrats. They have put their armies out. They think that will make the difference for them in Ohio and Florida tonight, and they believe that'll put them over the top, Britt.
All right, Carl, of course, the Republicans have been working on their ground game for tonight for 4 years, having felt that 4 years ago they didn't do the best job they could. So this is a couple of major armies of the night, I suppose, out there tonight. All night long, the best source anywhere for election information is our Fox News race ticker. It's at the bottom of your screen. On your left is a running updated count of the electoral votes from states where all the polls have closed and where Fox News has been able to project a winner. In the middle of the screen, the returns by state for the presidential race, Senate and governor's races if they apply, and certain selected House races. In the center is an alert bar where you will find breaking election news. Now, we're going to take a quick look at a couple of the boards in states where the polls have closed. Virginia presidential race, we rate that at this hour too close to call. Similarly, in South Carolina, we rate that race too close to call. We're going to take a brief break now. When we come back, we will be following the national election picture. You're watching You Decide 2004 on Fox News Channel. Okay, the polls have closed in a few states, and there are presidential as well as Senate races, obviously, in those states. And let's take a look first at Georgia U.S. Senate race, where we're projecting the Republican victory tonight. That is a pickup for the Republican Party. Johnny Isakson, the Republican candidate in that race, he was running against Denise Majette. Denise Majette may be known to some of you. And we're looking at South Carolina. We're rating that too close to call, by the way. And the similar situation information we have in Kentucky. A little back for a moment to this Georgia Senate race. Kind of an interesting race there. Johnny Isakson winning that race. Denise Majette is an ambitious person. She was a political unknown just about 2.5 years ago, and she upset Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, who was noted, among other things, for saying that President Bush knew in advance of the attack on the World Trade Center and on all the 9/11 attacks. And she got defeated in a primary by Denise Majette, who got elected to Congress. She got elected to Congress, stayed there a couple of years, ran for the Senate, and it appears, for the moment at least, that her political ambitions have come to a halt. Joining me here throughout tonight will be Fred Barnes, executive editor of the Weekly Standard, Mort Kondracki, executive editor of Roll Call, Bill Kristol, editor of the Weekly Standard, looking perplexed, and Juan Williams, who's never perplexed, cheerful and on the ball as always. As you can see, folks, the gang is all here. Thoughts from you gentlemen on the scant results that we have so far. No surprise that Isakson wins that Georgia seat, but that is a net pickup for the Republicans, right?
Yeah, the big surprise is really Virginia. Too close to call.
Yeah, at this hour, yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, I agree. That is a surprise.
But just one clarification, which I'm sure you and Michael Barone will make at greater length, but too close to call could just mean that the data is not in yet or the data is not good. I mean, we've had plenty of too close to call races in the past where the states ended up an 8 or 10 point margin. It could also be the case that we have a lot of data from Virginia and it's dead even. I don't know, but you know.
But you would never have thought.
It's 20 minutes after the polls will close. Plenty of states will remain too close to call.
Well, I think that something that is likely. I would be shocked if Kerry were to carry Virginia or South Carolina. I mean, George Bush won in Virginia with 52.5% of the vote last time. But what is fascinating is the Jim Bunning Dan Morgiardo contest in Kentucky, where Bunning consistently said incendiary things that got himself in deeper and deeper trouble, including accusing his opponent of looking like one of Saddam Hussein's children, you know, and raised questions about his.
Yeah, when you make a mistake like that, say something like that, truth is not a defense.
In defense of Bunning, he didn't say whether it was Uday or Kusay. He didn't, you know. So I thought, look,
and he didn't mean it in a hostile way.
Yeah, he did. Well, he followed it by saying that's a good thing.
The interesting thing about Johnny Isakson winning the Georgia Senate seat, Britt, is that he's the heir to two very important people. When Newt Gingrich left Congress, Johnny Isakson took over his House seat. And who is he replacing in the Senate? Someone who is a Democrat who is more conservative than he is, namely Zell Miller, who gave that fiery speech in favor of Bush at the Republican convention.
Thank you all. We're going to take a break here and try to support ourselves. But when we come back, we'll check back in with Chris Wallace to see what the exit polls are telling him, and he can tell us. Stay tuned. Throughout the night, we'll be checking in on the exit poll team, headed by my colleague and the host of Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace. Chris, what are you learning so far from the 6 states where the polls are now closed?
Well, several interesting things, Britt, but let me just start by explaining what the exit poll is and how it works. The National Election Pool, or NEP, is conducting more than 12,000 interviews today with actual voters as they leave their polling places. NEP chose the location scientifically. The idea is if you know how these precincts are voting, you know how a state, or for that matter, the whole nation is voting. And one thing we're seeing tonight is how the terrorism issue is affecting voters. Let's start with the October surprise, the tape of Osama bin Laden that was released Friday. A lot of people thought this would help the president by putting the war on terror on the front burner, but that's not the way it's turning out. 44% of voters say the bin Laden tape was very or somewhat important to their vote. 53% of those people say they voted for Kerry, 46% for the president. We also asked, which candidate do you trust to handle terrorism? 43% said they trust Kerry, while 55% said they trust the president. Here's one more way the terrorism issue is playing out. Slightly more than half of all voters say the country is safer from terrorism than it was 4 years ago. Not surprisingly, these people say, if we can move to the next board, here we go. Not surprisingly, those people who say the country was safer, 78% voted for Mr. Bush, 20% for John Kerry. But 43% of voters say the country is less safe, and they are going for Kerry 86% to 12%. There is one more interesting result on the terror issue. 72% of voters, almost 3 in 4, say they are either very or somewhat worried there will be another major terrorist attack in the U.S. But those voters split down the middle in supporting the president or Kerry. Britt?
That's interesting. You know, Chris, I detected what I thought might have been a little impatience on your part, where you had to wait for before the graphic came up that you needed. But I think it would add a little pizzazz to our conversations if I prefaced my remarks to you by saying, and then when you wanted to answer me back, you could go, and it would give, you know, a kind of a consistency to the whole Fox News channel style tonight.
Is this a point that I could say something that would win me some money from the comedian Jon Stewart?
If you do, I'll tell you, buddy, you're going to be in a lot of trouble with me, because I'm going to get a gun and it'll be...
Well, but maybe 1 o'clock tonight I can say what will win me money.
That'll be the end of you, buddy. All right, Chris, I'll be back to you later. All right, everybody. What do we... I noticed the electoral vote count now is 34-3 for President Bush. Lest you believe he's broken out to a 31-point electoral vote lead that likely to last a while, keep in mind that these come from states that we've been able to call that were overwhelmingly for him. They were all red states. Kentucky and Indiana and Georgia have all gone for President Bush. It would have been quite a shock to Senator Kerry if he'd won any of them. And I guess the senator picked up Vermont, which was a total non-shock too. So that's the tally so far, but it doesn't really tell us too much. 7:30 rolls around in about 5 minutes. Polls will close in a number of states there. Bill, any thoughts about what we ought to be particularly on the lookout for at half past the hour?
Ohio closes at 7:30. It's one of the big three. Everyone pretty much agrees that if anyone swept the big three, Ohio, Florida, and Pennsylvania, those two close at 8. That person becomes the president. And Bush probably would be helpful to the president to hold both Ohio and Florida, obviously.
He's got a little more room for error, though, among those states, because even if he lost one of them, I suppose he could make it up, at least theoretically, in where Wisconsin and Iowa,
New Mexico, Wisconsin. So Ohio is the first real big one to close, and I assume it'll be too close to call for quite a while, since no one expects it to break big. But we'll see if we can call any of those three, I should think, by 9 o'clock, 9:30, we'll really have a sense of where the race is going. And then, to be fair to Juan, who correctly pointed out earlier that Virginia is too close to call, and I said, well, it's too early to say that it's too close to call yet. It may just be an accident of the data. But it seems like if data is coming in on Virginia and it remains too close to call, if we're still here half an hour from now at 5 to 8 Eastern Time and Virginia is still too close to call, then that means Kerry's competitive in Virginia. And insofar as that might be part of a national trend, it can't be good for President Bush. He won Virginia by 8 points in 2000.
It has been a little bit tighter, and we even heard during the late stages of the campaign that Senator Kerry was considering going in there again, and they put a little dab of money, $50,000, something like that, which isn't much by today's money standards, into the race, though, believing they might have had a little more hope there. What is that? Northern Virginia is, I guess,
Northern Virginia is growing. It's a little more Democratic. We elected a Democratic governor, a moderately conservative Democratic governor who was pro-gun and not a Massachusetts liberal, but maybe John Kerry has convinced more people than we realize, especially in Northern Virginia, that he's less liberal and less Massachusetts than the Bush campaign hoped people would see him as.
Virginia is a Republican state, and South Carolina is a Republican state. Both are still too close to call. Those are states that Bill was right. Bush won Virginia by 8 points in 2000. He won South Carolina by even more points. It was well into double digits. Both are, and the fact that these are still too close to call is a little worrisome for the Bush camp. If you look at,
folks, if you want to keep track of this while we're on to other things, you can keep an eye on that election ticker there at the bottom of your screen, which periodically will flash for you the raw vote totals and percentages on the screen. You're seeing there, we're whipping through Kentucky now in a couple of, that is a House race we're looking at right now in Kentucky, but that's the place to look if you're trying to keep track of these raw vote. There you see South Carolina. That's really not much of a vote to go on there. Well, we're going to take a brief break here, folks, but when we come back, more returns will be coming up on 7:30. Stay tuned. It is just seconds away now from 7:30, and at 7:30 the polls close in 3 states, North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia. And we do expect to be able to tell you something at the bottom of the hour about some of those races. In fact, so if you just bear with me for 4 more seconds, I'm allowed by the political gods to do. Ohio presidential race, too close to call. No surprise there at this hour. North Carolina, similarly, too close to call. West Virginia, however, Fox News now projects that President Bush has carried the state of West Virginia, which he carried also 4 years ago, so that's not what we call a net pickup for him. George Voinovich, popular Republican incumbent senator in Ohio, we project him a winner tonight. In North Carolina, we project that Governor Easley, the Democrat, has won re-election. We also project that Manchin, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate in West Virginia, will be elected. None of those things is a surprise. Virginia presidential race remains too close to call. We're uncertain as to exactly why. Kerry is up in early returns by, as you can see, a 14% margin. Nobody expects that's going to hold. And well, President Bush way up in early South Carolina voting. Not enough in yet to project, just a few thousand votes, as you can see there. So that gives you a sense of why we're saying those races are too close to call, even though there are ones that we thought would go fairly quickly in the night. For the president, certainly not states where John Kerry had put in a lot of activity and resources in the recent phases of this campaign. So as we look ahead here, any further thoughts?
On this, we've got North Carolina is too close to call. That would be another shocker if Kerry were somehow even to narrow the gap there. I mean, North Carolina is a Republican state.
But it's not a state entirely inhospitable to Democrats.
John Edwards, after all, is from there.
But that would be a pickup when they got it.
It is a state that Bush won by 13 points in 2000. If it's, I think it's probably just no vote in, and that's West Virginia is also interesting because it was a state that always voted Democratic until 2000.
Yeah, look at that. There's in South Carolina, there are only 8,000 votes we're looking at there, and no wonder we can't call it.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting about North Carolina that I'm sure we didn't
Virginia,
it's
46,000 votes. We just see on the screen there. 46,000 votes in that state is not many.
Is the North Carolina Senate race, in which Erskine Bowles, former Clinton White House chief of staff, is running against Congressman Richard Burr. Burr had been leading in all the advance polls. If Bowles somehow turns that around, that would be a hold for the Democrats. But it would be a necessary hold if they have any chance of recapturing control of the Senate. And if Bunning, the Republican in Kentucky, were to go down, that would significantly improve the Democrats' chances of getting a hold of the Senate.
Now, the Senate is 51-48, effectively 51-49 Republican. The 49th vote usually being furnished by Jim Jeffords, the independent from Vermont. He votes with the Democrats, or at least organized sides with them. On paper, then people say, well, why would it be so hard? They only have to pick up a couple votes. Explain.
Well, because there are Democratic seats. There are more Democratic seats at risk, especially these seats in the South, including Georgia, which is already gone. In other words, that's already switched from Democrat to Republican. It's almost, well, it is certain that Illinois would balance that out because Barack Obama is leading Alan Keyes by light years.
So we got about 9 or 10 close races that are up for grabs.
The polls are still open in Illinois. I don't want more to preclude. The citizens of Illinois have a chance still to get to hurry to the polls and elect my old roommate, Alan Keyes.
They have a chance to elect Barack Obama by more than 50%. That's what they have a chance to do. They have a chance to make history.
The only issue the suspense team tonight would be whether Barack Obama might get 100% of the vote. And anything less than that one, I think we'd have to agree, would be an upset.
Would be a shock.
So anyway, so Georgia and Illinois balance themselves out, and then you got all these other races. I mean, the key, I think, race to the most fascinating personality race is the Daschle-Thune race in South Dakota. It would be horribly ironic for the Democrats if they were to pick up control of the Senate and lose their leader, Tom Daschle. I mean, that would be, I don't know, I guess Harry Reid, the Democrat from Nevada, who's the deputy leader, would be the likeliest successor, although there would be a contest. I think Chris Dodd, probably from Connecticut, would challenge.
I'll tell you what, Mort, let's cross that bridge when we come to it. We got to get the Democrats, we got to get the Senate, and then Daschle's got to lose. All of that is still out there.
That may be mathematically impossible anyway.
And I think you may be right, Fred. But in addition to the Senate and presidential results that we've been going on about here, there's a lot of other stuff on the ballot tonight. The whole House is up, and addition to that, there are a lot of ballot items. Some of them are very interesting, and who better than our buddy and colleague Greta Van Susteren to keep an eye on them and analyze them. Greta, what do you got?
Well, Brett, there were 160 ballot measures facing voters this year, and let me go to the one in Georgia, which was defining marriage between a man and a woman. And Fox News is projecting that the voters down there have voted yes, that marriage will be between a man and a woman. What's sort of interesting is they already have a law like that down in the state of Georgia, but this adds it to the Constitution so they'll be tougher to challenge in courts. In the state of Kentucky, also considering the issue whether to define marriage as between a man and a woman, yes, 68%, no, 32%, and the third state out of 11 that are facing this issue tonight, the state of Ohio, defining marriage between a man and a woman, yes, we're projecting is winning in that state. And what's interesting also about the Ohio ballot is that it goes farther than simply gay marriage and saying that marriage is between a man and a woman. It also bans civil unions. So this is a particularly more, at least it's a broader one than many of the other sort of gay measures that are on the ballots this year. So we still have to hear from 8 other states, but that's the latest on defining marriage as between a man and a woman. Back to you, Brett.
Greta, how many of those ballot initiatives on defining marriage are out there tonight?
Well, there are 11 of them, and the reason why they're even on the ballot is because in the state of Massachusetts, the whole issue of gay marriages, other states are wondering, are we going to have to recognize marriages in Massachusetts? So that what these states are doing is they want to take the jump and say, you know, we're going to ban it in our state, so if you get married in Massachusetts, don't come to our state and think that you're married there. So that's the whole purpose of getting it on the ballot right now.
Okay, Greta, thanks very much. That, of course, is a potent issue, emotional issue, to some a religious issue as well. I guess it's on the ballot where else? Ohio, where it could have some impact on Michigan.
And Oregon are the 3 states where it might have some bearing on the presidential race. The hope has been in Ohio, in the Bush camp, is that because it appeals to, in polls, about half the Democratic voters, that they would vote for that amendment in favor of marriage as only a man and a woman, and then there would be some spillover, and they'd vote for Bush when they might disagree with him on Iraq and the economy. But because of that issue, and it is so potent, that
I mean, it might draw a certain kind of Democratic voter.
In other words, it would Bush was supporting a constitutional amendment against gay marriage, not to shore up his base, which was very strong anyway, but to cut into the Democratic base. Estimates have been that he might get an extra 50 to 100,000 voters in Ohio because of this referendum on the ballot.
Yeah, and black Democrats. Black Democrats, Hispanic, but it's very strong in the black community. This is an issue that really has made a difference where the president has allowed him to make inroads.
Is it your sense, Juan, that cuts against Senator Kerry among those black voters, or might it just get Democratic voters to the polls so they can vote for Kerry?
No, because Kerry is someone who says he believes in the whole idea of civil unions. He's not endorsed the idea of gay marriage.
Right.
President Bush, though, has been very aggressive in saying he's opposed to gay marriage. As Fred said, proposed the Defense of Marriage Act in the Congress and as a constitutional amendment. And I think people view this as part of the morality issue we heard about earlier from Chris Wallace. They say, you know, morals very important. Well, let me just tell you that in the black church, and I think the president's been campaigning with these black ministers, this is a cutting-edge issue that goes against most black voters who were opposed to President Bush's record.
But has he been aggressive enough? Because social conservatives in Ohio are worried that there will be a big turnout. This constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage will pass, but a lot of those people voting for that amendment won't know there's a difference between President Bush and Senator Kerry. Senator Kerry says he, too, wants marriage to be between a man and a woman, and Bush has not pressed the case. And I'm told that they had ads ready to go, radio advertisements, which would highlight the difference between Bush and Kerry on this issue, and they backed off from it. They didn't want to seem intolerant. The Republicans have been nervous about trying to capitalize on these social and cultural issues. It would be very ironic if our poll shows that moral values is the #1 issue in the race. Bush wins at 4-1 over Kerry. But the Bush campaign has been reluctant to elevate the moral values issues and may have left some votes on the table, so to speak.
To his credit,
they didn't have to.
To his credit, in the end, but rather quietly, Bush actually came out in favor of civil unions. I mean, he kind of whispered it, which would grant gay couples the benefits of marriage without using the word. That's the Kerry position as well. And you're right. I mean, so there wasn't all that much difference except on the constitutional amendment.
President Bush didn't Wait a minute. President Bush didn't whisper it. He said it on national television to Charlie Gibson on ABC.
I know, but it was
hardly a whisper.
I know, but it wasn't a big item, and he only.
Well, you knew about it.
What I think, because I'm interested. But one thing that I think is going to be fascinating is whether Bush actually gets more than 9% of the black vote, which is what he got in 2000. Can either the gay marriage issue or something else elevate that number? That's something I want to watch.
Okay, we got to take a brief break here, and when we come back, we're going to check in with Michael Barone, who is down at the Fox News decision desk. Interesting place down there. Before we go, let's take a quick look at the raw vote count as we have it so far. There you go. As we roll through the ticker here, there it is. 57-42 President Bush. That's with only 1% of the nation's precincts in. No way you can tell anything from that nationally. We'll be right back. Let's get caught up on some of the other races we're keeping an eye on tonight. Joining us to do that, as she will through the evening, is Fox News anchor Martha McCallum. Martha?
Hi there, Britt. Thank you. As you mentioned before, there are about 9 or 10 key Senate races that we're watching very closely tonight. They sort of make up the weave that goes behind the presidential race that will tell what the balance of power will be like in Washington. Democrats would need to pick up 12 seats in the House, net gain seats, in order to take over a majority in the House. And there are 11 states that are going to be electing a governor tonight. Let's take a look at some of the races and see how they're stacking up right now. This is South Carolina. We've said that the presidential race too close to call in South Carolina. This race also too close to call. Inez Tenenbaum and Jim DeMint, 57% for DeMint. This is a very interesting race at this point. 47% of the precincts in right now. Jim Bunning is lagging behind Dan Mangiardo, 53-47. That would be a big loss for that incumbent, Jim Bunning. Indiana, U.S. Senate, no big surprise here. 61% going for the incumbent, Evan Bayh. No surprise here as well. In Vermont, a state that has already gone for John Kerry, Patrick Leahy, the incumbent senator there, is winning tonight. Too close to call. This one, Clooney versus Davis. This is, of course, Nick Clooney, the actor's, George Clooney, I should say, his father. He is losing right now 43-55%. 40% of those precincts are in. A lot of Hollywood money has gone into his race. Interesting to see how that turns out. Kentucky, we have Miller versus Ann Northup. Northup with 62%. She's defending her Republican seat there in Kentucky and has won several races in tight races in the past. Indiana Governor, Joe Kernan versus Mitch Daniels. This is George Bush's former OMB director. Interesting race here as well. 54% going for Daniels right now. Joe Kernan, who is the incumbent, took over for Frank O'Bannon after he suffered a stroke. He's in at 45% right now, and that is with just 15% of those precincts reporting. So we're going to keep a close eye on all of these races for you, Britt, and the panel throughout the night. I'll send it back to you.
All right, Martha, thanks very much. Glad to have you with us tonight. Let's take a look at some of the races, the state presidential races that we're looking at, which remain too close to call. We are putting Ohio conspicuously in that category. That's a very big one. Well too close to call on that. North Carolina, the same. That's one we expect to go for President Bush. Be very interesting if it went against him. Same thing in Virginia. President appears to be well ahead, but not a whole lot in. A couple of 100,000 votes. That's a pretty big state. South Carolina, same thing. Very skimpy returns there as well. So why can't we call some of these states, and why can't we call some others? Well, who better to ask than the man who was with our Fox News decision team just down by the decision desk, Michael Barone. Michael.
Nice to be with you, Britt. Well, the question is, why can't we call some of these races? Let's think about the Atlantic Coast states: Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. When I started analyzing these states, tons of decades ago, these were heavily rural states. Politics was basically whites voting for conservative Democrats, maybe Republicans, blacks voting Democratic. What's happened is you've had a lot of economic growth here. This is a boom region in many ways. In places like, and what you've had in places like Fairfax County, Northern Virginia, across from Washington, the Research Triangle area in North Carolina, and the Piedmont area around Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina, it has attracted a lot of people with graduate school degrees. And in this election and in past recent elections, graduate school degree people are heavily Democratic. They're the educational group that's most Democratic. They include not just scientists, doctors, and lawyers, but also teachers, social workers, and other government employees who have advanced degrees. They've been giving Democrats big margins, and I think that's one of the reasons that those states have been moving somewhat to the Democrats in recent years. Ohio's another case altogether. Ohio is a case, it's a manufacturing state. It continues to be. It does have some high-income residential areas and some high-education people, but it tends to be sort of blue-collar. It is and remains culturally conservative. We've had an amendment on same-sex marriage in there, but it also is a state that has had some economic woes. Former four-term governor, Republican Governor Jim Rhodes always said there's only one issue in Ohio, and it's jobs, jobs, jobs. There has been job loss in the last 4 years, and so consequently, President Bush has had some problems there. I've taken a look at some of the returns in neighboring Indiana and Kentucky areas where the actual returns have come in to see in areas that are somewhat similar to many places in Ohio. What I found was this: Vigo County, Indiana, the gritty factory town of Terre Haute, that voted about 53% for Bush. It voted 52% for him 4 years ago. He's getting about the same level of support. In Kentucky, Fayette County, which is Lexington, Kentucky, a relatively booming area. That area voted for George W. Bush by about the same or slightly greater margin than it did 4 years before, with 95% of the returns in. He's ahead 53-46. That's similar to some areas in Ohio. Both of those are. But they're basically the same place they were 4 years ago. And in Ohio 4 years ago, George W. Bush's percentage of the vote was 49.99%.
Wow. Michael, thank you for those insights. We'll be checking back with you early and often. Well, what about this, everybody? Does it seem, based on what we're hearing from Michael, what we're seeing, it's pretty hard so far to pick out any real trend. I mean, we haven't had a race go, except for a couple we can't call, which are, we seem a little surprised that we can't call a couple of these races. He's pretty well explained that, it seems to me. It doesn't look like we really, taking the exit poll and raw data information at this point, can make much of a calculation, can we?
No, I mean, well, I was struck with Michael compared Bush's total as a percentage with 4 years ago and said it was almost the same. Of course, Gore beat Bush by 0.5% of the popular vote nationally 4 years ago, but Nader got 2.7% of the vote. And one Democratic mantra over the last 4 years is, look, Gore and Nader together got about 51%, Bush got about 48%. All we have to do is replay that election, knock Nader down from 2.7 to 0.7, assume the great bulk of those Nader voters go to Kerry this time, and we win. The Republican counter-argument has been, well, let's look at the intervening election, 2002. We had a national off-year election. If you add up all the congressional vote in 2002, Republicans win about 52-48, I believe. And for me, one of the big questions of this election has always been, is this 2000 or is this 2002? 2002 is post 9/11. If you think the country puts more of a premium on Republicans' advantage on national security, you think maybe we'll replay the 2002 election, Bush will win by 3 or 4 points. That's where a lot of the polls were going into today. If you think, no, it's the 2000 election again, then it's pretty good for the Democrats, because in 2000, though Bush beat Gore, obviously, by a very narrow margin in the Electoral College, if a chunk of that Nader vote is suppressed and goes to the Democrats, it's a slight Democratic majority. The interesting thing about that was we found in one late poll that the three-way race was better for Kerry than the two-way race. And we all went to the pollsters and said, folks, this doesn't add up. And they said, wait a minute. For the remaining Nader voters, who are hardcore Nader voters, one issue that has emerged for them is ballot access, and that the Kerry people were trying so hard to keep them off ballots everywhere, they came to despise the Kerry forces, and that it isn't altogether surprising that if they broke, a lot of them wouldn't vote at all, right, if they couldn't get on the ballot, and those that did might vote for Bush despite Kerry. So there's another wild card in the deck. We're going to take a break. Much more to come. Stay tuned. That total for Bush, Kerry won in states one is a reflection of where the states were. We have yet to have a surprise in any of our calls for president so far, nor really any other surprises as well. But we do have interesting information to impart to you based on our exit poll findings. And with that, Chris Wallace. Chris?
You know, Britt, it always seemed the war in Iraq would be the central issue in this campaign, and our Fox News exit poll indicates that it may end up being just that important. One question we asked, how do you feel about the decision to go to war with Iraq? 49% say they approve, 47% disapprove. That's a much closer margin than in those most pre-election polls. Of those voters that still approve of the Iraq decision, 15% say they voted for Kerry, 85% for Bush. But of those that disapprove, 88% voted for Kerry and 10% for Bush. There we go. When voters are asked how they think things are now going for the U.S. in Iraq, it gets even tougher for the president. Of the 42% of voters who think it's going well, 10% say they voted for Kerry, 89% for Bush. But of the 53% of voters who think things are going badly, 83% voted for Kerry, only 15% for Bush. And here's one more way the war in Iraq is playing out. 52% of voters agree with the president that it is part of the war on terror. But 45% have been persuaded by Kerry that Iraq is separate from the war on terror. A lot of people always thought this election would end up as a referendum on President Bush. And if it turns out that way, the war in Iraq may turn out to be the decisive issue. Britt?
Chris, thank you very much. Interesting stuff there. Well, that is intriguing. You know, this Iraq, you know, you see it cutting in all directions. It's kind of predictable in some counts, but not all.
I think Chris is right. I mean, the 49-47 approve over disapprove of the original decision to go to the war in Iraq in our election day polling is a lower approval number than our Fox News poll showed last week and than most public polls showed last week. That was running around 53-42 typically approve of the decision to go to war.
Difference, but it's two different polls.
Yeah, but the Fox poll, I wonder if that last week of news, the arms dump, the front page of the New York Times, they repeated the Kerry attacks on Bush, which I personally thought were a little ridiculous, but for not being able to secure the arms dump, the continuation on that all week. I thought at the time that was a mistake by Kerry, but if he knocked the approval of the war in Iraq and confidence in the war in Iraq, Chris said that, what, 53% think it's going badly? If Kerry was able to knock confidence in Bush's decision to go to war in Iraq and management of the war in Iraq down to 3 or 4 points, that could have been the right thing politically.
Yeah, I don't even think you need to worry about this exit poll. I think there's a simple formula here, regardless of what the poll says, and that is the war on terror helps Bush, the war in Iraq helps Kerry. It's as simple as that. And
but Fred, that may be true, but that's something new for us, because in all these polls that we've been looking at, all running up until today, President Bush has outpolled Senator Kerry on who would best handle Iraq.
But look what Senator Kerry was doing late in the campaign. Remember, he struggled earlier to talk about domestic issues, finally gave up, and in the final weeks of the campaign was talking about Iraq because he thought it was a fruitful issue for him. That question about these explosives that was so overplayed by the press, these explosives that were not found in Iraq, Kerry spent 4 days in the last week of the campaign just on that issue. And frankly, I think he was smart to do that.
It's interesting, you know, that and we might bring Chris Wallace back into this discussion, that Chris, sitting at this very desk just a couple days ago, had John Kerry's principal aide and advisor Bob Shrum on as a guest. And playing off the week's news, Chris, are you there? Playing off the week's news, Chris asked him repeatedly about what the senator was saying about that, and Bob Shrum evidenced some frustration that he wasn't being asked about the domestic issues, which it was clear that Bob Shrum, at least, top Kerry advisor, thought ought to be engaged here.
It would not be an accident if John Kerry were to win the presidency tonight by ignoring Bob Shrum's advice. With all due respect to Bob Shrum, who's an acquaintance of all of ours, he's, I think, 0 for 7 in presidential races.
But making fun of Bob Shrum aside.
I'm not making fun of Bob Shrum.
No, but the serious point, though, is I think there was a real debate within the Kerry camp.
Yeah, but the debate was over.
Should they focus on Iraq, or should they try to get back to domestic? But the debate was over. When I was out on the campaign just last week, they were talking domestic, and they said their plan for the final stretch run was to focus on domestic issues. But they couldn't because of 2 things. One is the explosive story, and 2, the tape of Osama bin Laden that appeared, and they felt absolutely put on the spot and needed to respond to the presence of the bin Laden tape, fearing that it would benefit President Bush.
No, but on the question question of the explosives, they could have ignored that story if they wanted to.
And Kerry made a personal choice, Juan, I think. Isn't that right? I mean, I'm told that Kerry made the personal decision to jump on the story and thought, he has always thought, remember, that he could win a foreign policy fight with George W. Bush. And to some degree, he's overruled his advisors who wanted him desperately to get back in a Clintonian manner to domestic policy. And if Kerry were to win tonight, I think you'd have to say that Kerry may have been his own best campaign manager.
Well, and here's the part that Kerry saw, and I think a number of his top aides saw, to be in all fairness. They thought that the explosive story suggested to the American people that there was a problem here with trust, and that the trust, I mean, which is Bush was advertising the whole idea. Who do you trust to better manage the war in Iraq? And here was the Kerry team, especially John Kerry, saying, if this explosives issue is true, if we can get that through the American people, will suggest that that trust in the president has been misplaced because those weapons are missing, and those weapons therefore could fall into the hands of terrorists.
The word that that Kerry kept using about the war in Iraq was incompetent. That Bush did not have a plan to go in. That he was in error when he thought that the Iraqis would greet us with garlands and all that. And that one thing after another kept happening. And don't forget that last week 9 American soldiers were killed in one day, which is the highest it's been in a long time, I believe, since the war. Right. And even though Kerry didn't make a lot of it, it was still there on the front pages.
No, it's almost 8 o'clock, and a rich harvest of poll closings occurs, including Alabama, Connecticut, Delaware, D.C., Florida, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Missouri, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, Tennessee. And we were going to be able to tell you about, we're going to have some calls to make in some of those states. We know you're going to be very interested in them. Both calls for both the presidential race and the Senate race as well. So stand by. It's 8 o'clock. For president in Florida, polls just closed, too close to call. Same thing in Pennsylvania, too close to call. New Hampshire, too close to call as well there. Important state. New Jersey, however, Fox News now projects John Kerry will win the state of New Jersey. That is a state that there was some thought he might be losing traction in. It appears not. Fox News projects John Kerry the winner in New Jersey tonight. Illinois, no surprise there. John Kerry the projected winner. Tennessee, President Bush, no surprise there, projected a winner. President's projected the winner also in Oklahoma. That's a state he won 4 years ago, as is Missouri, but we rate that race in Missouri too close to call. We'll try to check in with the decision team to find out why. Massachusetts, no surprise at all there, of course. Home state of the senator, he wins in Maryland. That's expected. The winner in Maine. Now, there are 4 electoral votes. We're allocating only 3 in our projection there. There's a 4th that may be up for grabs there. We'll explain that later. Mississippi, we think, is too close to call. No one expects the president not to win there. Alabama, the president, a projected winner there. Delaware, not a surprise. Senator Kerry, the projected winner. Connecticut, same thing. District of Columbia, really no surprise. Illinois, that's a gain for the Democrats with the victory of Barack Obama. The only question is, how much of a majority will he get? Not a lot of competition there from the Republican Alan Keyes, who came from out of state. Florida Senate race, we rate that too close to call. We also rate the Oklahoma Senate race too close to call. And in Missouri, we do project, however, that Christopher Kitt, as he's known, Bond, is a winner, incumbent. Pennsylvania Senate, our inspector expected to win there, but the fact that it's too close to call is kind of interesting. He is well ahead, it seemed. Chris Dodd, veteran Democratic senator, incumbent from Connecticut, he's a winner. Maryland, Barbara Mikulski, also a veteran and popular Democrat in her home state. New Hampshire, we're not calling that yet. Judd Gregg, son of the veteran New Hampshire politician Hugh Gregg, and the incumbent Republican senator is expected to win. You can see he's ahead, but we're not calling it yet. We are calling Alabama, however, for the incumbent Republican Richard Shelby, he a former Democrat. All right, folks, based on what we see now, interesting that we're able to call a couple of these states. Interesting, perhaps, I guess the most interesting call so far is New Jersey for Kerry. Agreed?
Yeah, I think New Jersey is the one that, was up a real question there. We saw the president in there late, vice president in there. Lots of talk about the idea that so many people who live in New Jersey had been impacted. Literally, hundreds died who were in the World Trade Center buildings on 9/11. But, able to call it. The other factor and the other trend that we can see as we look at these results coming in is the states that you would have thought would have been clearly in the president's bailiwick at this time are too close to call. I don't think that's good news for the president.
Well, we have in mind here which particular states when you're saying that. Mississippi. But in Mississippi, we don't. What you can't tell right away, and we'll be able to tell when we see a little bit more data here, is whether we're not calling Mississippi either way or for the president because it's unexpectedly close. There just isn't any data to speak of.
But here's what I would say. I mean, each of these states has their idiosyncrasies in terms of when the data comes in, how much confidence people have in the exit polls, when the precincts come in that they can match with the exit polls, which would give you more confidence so you could then call the state. Having said that, every state where the polls have closed that Gore carried in 2000, except for Pennsylvania, we've already called for Kerry. So Kerry is holding the Gore states comfortably, it seems. New Jersey just closed, and we have enough confidence in the exit polls and the early data
we now see
to
what's
call it.
Yeah, and when looking at the electoral total there that you can see on the screen, it's now 77-66, which shows you how quickly that gap closed.
Whereas Virginia, North Carolina,
South Carolina,
Missouri,
Mississippi.
Yeah, but let's assume Missouri, New Hampshire, states that Bush carried in 2000 seem to be uncertain enough that we're not able to call them. Now, they could all ultimately go to Bush, and we could end up
4 years ago what happened with Alabama. Remember that? We were talking about Alabama too close to call till all hours. In fact, the president won it handily, and there's always been some question as to why. And I remember a lot of people at the time, I got a lot of email about that. People saying, what was the matter with you holding out on Alabama? Well, you know, sometimes it's just a question of you know, the speed at which the data come in and so forth. But that was a call that a lot of people thought should have and could have been made earlier and wasn't. So,
well, you know, the other,
and I guess we're looking at Alabama, we called that already.
Yeah. On the other two close to call lists, I'm fascinated by this Oklahoma Senate race and the Pennsylvania Senate race as well. In the Oklahoma Senate race, Tom Coburn is another one of these incendiary Republicans who's been saying that lesbians are dominating the public schools in Oklahoma City, and that girls shouldn't go to the bathroom together. You know, he's running against quite a good candidate, Brad Carson, who's a former Rhodes Scholar and a moderate congressman, and this was a race that was thought to be that Coburn was way ahead in. If this turns out to be a close one, or Brad Carson pulls it out, that will help. That would be a pickup for the Democrats and would help them perhaps gain a Senate seat.
And Mort, who would you be in favor of in that race? I can't guess from what you've said.
Moderates, you know, wherever there is a moderate.
Look, there's one thing missing so far, Brett, and that is no state has changed hands. Now, the Bush states amount to 278 electoral votes. That's 9 more than or 8 more than are needed to win a majority in the Electoral College and be elected president. Now, Kerry, what we are watching for tonight is a Bush state of some size or several small ones that Kerry takes. It could be Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida. We don't know whether he'll take any of them.
Pennsylvania was a Gore state.
Pennsylvania was
Ohio,
a Gore state,
Florida.
but certainly Ohio, Florida, New Hampshire, Missouri, which we haven't called yet.
Virginia, Mississippi.
Well, I think we both agree that Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia will, or rather Mississippi will fall into the Bush camp.
Let's take a quick look.
But we haven't seen a single red state become a blue state yet.
Now, let's take a quick look at just recapping a few of these boards on states. Ohio president, too close to call, folks. We're not calling that one yet. We're not calling North Carolina yet, although we expect President Bush to win that. Not calling Virginia, same reason. Look, the president's ahead. South Carolina, he's also ahead, but it's a little closer than we would like in order to call it. And while we're talking about too close to call and all that sort of stuff, let's check in at our decision desk with Michael Barone, who might be able to shed some light on all this. Michael?
Well, Brett, your question is, why aren't we calling these races? Part of the answer, of course, is technical. The exit poll material and the confidence limits that we have simply don't justify calling them. We want to see if the tabulated vote comes in and how it comes in before we call a race. To do so right now would be a high probability of getting it wrong. And as we've indicated earlier, there are cross currents in some of these races. I mean, states like South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia have active communities of conservative Christians, mega churches, those sort of constituencies that are strong for President Bush, but they've also had increasing numbers of graduate school educated voters who are high tend to vote for John Kerry and the Democrats, and they have substantial populations of African Americans who vote heavily for the Democrats. So turnout's important here. These have not mostly been target states during this election. The Kerry campaign did place some ads in Virginia and in North Carolina during the summer. They had some poll results when John Kerry was leading George W. Bush after the Democratic Convention that suggested they were realistic targets for them, but they decided that they were better off spending their money elsewhere as the summer wore on and we went into the Republican National Convention. They may be ruining the notion that they didn't spend more money there at that time and get themselves in a position where they might be capturing some of those red states that George W. Bush won in 2000 and which most of us did not think would be that competitive this year.
I want to come back to you again in a little while here. Ask, if you can, of the wizards behind you what they're seeing with regard to Missouri and the two Carolinas that is inhibiting a call. Also, Mississippi. Now, there may not be enough vote in on Mississippi, but it'd be interesting to know. We'll check back with you when you can. All right, thanks. Michael, thanks a million. Now, as we were discussing here, I mean, Michael gives us some illumination of this. It's just, we're just at a place here on election night before anything is broken really in either direction. And so we're kind of reading, we're reading off of partial results in states where nothing has really changed. Probably a little risky, because I can remember in 2002 we sat here and we were in this phase for a while. And I kept thinking with some desperation that the audience is probably all taken off for, the bowling alley because we weren't really being able to tell them anything, and nothing much seemed to be happening. And all of a sudden, it all happened, and the Senate changed hands.
Yeah, well, what I remember in 2000 was the Florida business. I mean.
I'm talking about 2002.
Yeah,
even in 2002, we sat here for a long time, and nothing seemed to break either way. And the outcome of the night was very indistinct for a long time, and it was not at all clear that it was going to turn out the way it had. Of course, I remember most vividly 1994. I was then covering the Clinton White House, and George Stephanopoulos came out about 9:30 on that election night and said that it looked good for the Democrats. And of course, they lost the House of Representatives for the first time since the earth cooled, and so this is the way it can be on these nights.
Well, there's reason to be spooked though on these on calling these states, because as Mort brought up Florida in 2000, the networks, including Fox, got it wrong twice. Called it first for Gore wrongly, then called it for Bush, and he hadn't won it, and then finally said nobody had won.
I continue to take the position with regard to those calls, Fred, that we were last to call Florida incorrectly for Gore.
I mean, you were dragged reluctantly into that call?
I will say that our decision desk was much more prudent about it and finally did make the call, and then some hours later we called it for Bush. A lot of people called that incorrect, but it turned out all right. Well, at least in terms, it turned out that he did win the state. All right,
yeah, but the fact is, in journalism, get it right is more important than getting it first.
Yes.
Well, and prudence,
Did you hear that? We're going to sit here tonight.
Fred's going to get an award. Fred's going to get an award for the Columbia Journalism Review.
It's going to be a long night, Brett. I have many rules of journalism.
You might not know what you've just witnessed, but Fred Barnes is rejoining the mainstream media and trying to do it from this desk here tonight. All right, speaking of members of the mainstream media, let's check in with our old buddy and colleague and friend, Major Garrett, who's keeping an eye on monkey shines in this election this year. Major, it's yours.
Well, Britt, if you're afraid that our audience may start going bowling now, they're really going to head for the doors now, because there's one story that we were all sort of thinking about would be a big one tonight, and so far, and I do underscore that word so far, these voter irregularities have proven much, much less of a problem than many political scientists, many lawyers, and even some reporters, like me, may have told our audience or led them to believe coming into election night. Problems have generally been tiny and at the margins. But now this doesn't mean that issues that look benign tonight could not appear, at least in the eyes of some partisan lawyers, a bit more sinister in the days ahead. Let's go to Ohio, for example. Ohio has not only been the focus of numerous last-minute presidential campaign visits, it has also been the epicenter of furious litigation over provisional ballots, voting registration lists, and partisan challengers monitoring polling places. At almost every turn, Democrats said Republicans were trying to suppress the minority vote, while Republicans have said they were merely standing up for the rule of law and fair voting. Now, most of these cases have been settled on the question of poll watchers. Well, that case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court this morning. In the end, they were allowed. Now, in Florida, several issues. Today, there are concerns about when absentee ballots will be counted in some of the most populous counties. Republicans fear that more than 100,000 of those absentee ballots could be left uncounted tonight and possibly through Thursday, possibly skewing the projection of Florida tonight. There are also legal scuffles today over poll challengers. Democrats sued to prevent them. Today, a state judge said they were legal and legitimate statewide. And as in Ohio, poll challengers are there to bring potential problems to the attention of election officials. They do not challenge voters face-to-face. Also in Florida, lost absentee ballots, more than 34,000 in one county, Broward County, a Democratic stronghold. Today, election officials said they discovered the problem late, tried to correct this problem over the weekend, but thousands of voters are simply out of luck.
We really are sympathetic with a voter who did not get a ballot, but we really made several attempts to get them there, and that was the last effort we made, of course, last weekend.
Britt, there's also a category we've been looking at today, which is not necessarily voter irregularities, but sort of dirty tricks on the campaign trail. Let me run down a few of them for you. In Milwaukee, 30 cars that the Republicans had set aside this morning for get-out-the-vote efforts, all their tires slashed. In Philadelphia, 4 polling places may have had votes already recorded before the polls opened. 1,500 of them, Republicans said. Democrats said that wasn't true, called it a nasty Republican allegation. And in Phoenix, a bomb threat closed one polling place, and bad machines forced some voters in New Orleans to come back later. As you can tell, Britt, scattered incidents, but nothing structural, and certainly not the problem some of us envisioned when told that more than 120 million voters would vote today, and warnings that the system might collapse and spring very, very big leaks. Britt, back to you in New York.
Major thanks. We'll be back to you later. You may have noticed, folks, if you've been watching that screen, that the electoral count, which Kerry was leading 77-66, has changed now. President Bush 74. The reason for that is that Fox News now projects that President Bush has won the state of South Carolina. That's one we've been kind of scratching our heads about, because it was one that he was certainly expected to win and won 4 years ago. So that bumps into the president's column tonight, and maybe for a moment at least allays some of the worries that Fred Barnes has about how we're going to call a state too soon, because he's the Tribune, you know, of journalistic responsibility and the keeper of the flame here at Fox News as we go through the night here. We're going to take a break here in just a moment as soon as I get the signal to do so, but before we do, as we've noted earlier in this hour, there are things that are on, or excuse me, we've noted earlier, whether it was in this hour or not, I can't remember. But there's a lot of cool stuff on ballot initiatives tonight, and Greta Van Susteren, who better, is keeping an eye on it for us. Greta?
Yes, the state of Florida has an issue on their ballot as whether parents must be notified before minors can have an abortion. And this, we're projecting from the state of Florida that, and I'm going to put the board up for you, that in the state of Florida, no, we're going instead, we have Georgia, the issue of when a marriage is, how marriage is defined, and that being between a man and a woman. Georgia has said yes, 79%, no, 21%. I think the next board should be the issue on the question of how marriage is defined in the state of Mississippi. If we could put that board up for the viewers. Well, I understand they're working on it, Britt, so I'm just going to have to tell you a little bit about some of these initiatives. All right, no, let's try the boards again. I'm getting lots of information in my ear. Let's try the boards once again. Mississippi, the issue of how marriage is defined there, and in Mississippi they define it as between a man and a woman. That is yes, is what Fox News is projecting. In the state of Oklahoma, the same issue, defining marriage as between a man and a woman. Again, the answer is yes. So far, all the states that we have projected winners on, and there are 11 states that have the issue on the ballots of how marriage is defined, whether it's between a man and a woman. So far, it's all been defined as between a man and a woman. All the voters so far have voted that way. Back to you, Britt.
All right, Greta, thanks very much. We're going to take a brief break now. Before we do, let's take a look at the tally of the popular vote nationwide as we have it so far. This isn't really very meaningful, but it's kind of fun to keep an eye on. With a tiny share of the precincts in, about 1 in 25, 56-43 for President Bush in the popular vote. And we'll be right back. Stay tuned. not calling Ohio or Florida, although the polls have closed in both cases for anybody. They're too close. But we are looking at and analyzing the exit polling data, and the person who is doing that is none other than our friend Chris Wallace. Chris.
Well, Britt, that's right. We don't have a final call in the state of Ohio yet, but our exit poll gives an indication of what voters are thinking about. Let's take a look. We asked voters there if they approved of the way President Bush is doing his job. 50% approved, but 49% disapprove, which gives you an indication. That's going to be a close race in Ohio. We also asked Ohio voters which issue mattered most to their vote. The economy and jobs were number one. 83% of people who said that those was the number one issue voted for Kerry. 17% for President Bush. Moral values was the second most important issue to Ohio voters. 83% of those voters supported Bush. 16% voted for Kerry. Now, Ohio lost 232,000 jobs during the president's term in office. 57% of voters in that state say the job situation in their part of the state is worse today than it was 4 years ago. 26% say it's the same, and 16% say it's better. By the way, in our exclusive Fox News telephone poll in Ohio, households owning guns supported President Bush 61% to 38% for Kerry. So apparently with this part of the Ohio population, it seems that Senator Kerry's much publicized and photographed recent goose hunting trip in Ohio did not make that big an impression. And let's take a look now briefly at the other key battleground of Florida, another state we haven't called, where the polls just closed. Hispanics make up 15% of the vote in Florida. They voted 45% for Kerry, 55% for Bush. And from our exclusive Fox telephone poll in that state, households with a member in the military or a veteran make up 47% of voters there, and they broke 47% for Kerry, 52% for President Bush. So, Britt, two states that are still too close to call and that look like they will be tight races tonight, just as they were 4 years ago.
Good, Chris. Thanks very much. And speaking of too close to call races, let's just run down some of these boards at places where the polls have indeed closed. In Florida, we rate that still too close to call the president up in the early countdown there. It looks like a lot of votes, 1 million for the president, 800,000 for Senator Kerry, but that's a big old state, 24% of the precincts in. In Pennsylvania, we're rating that too close to call. And as you can see, we don't have a lot of information about what's there. Ohio as well, we got no percentage of raw vote there. North Carolina, we got a fair amount, president well ahead, but that's only 3% of precincts. So you can see why we're not prepared to call that. And we got a similar situation, well, Virginia, beginning to get, but we're not even 1 million votes in Virginia. It's too big a state, I think, to make too early a call based on that, unless all the key precincts line up. Similarly, in Mississippi, we don't even have an ability to tell you how much raw vote there is, so there obviously probably isn't very much at all. So is there anything in the exit poll information that Chris was just reporting on that points us in any direction?
If the number on Hispanics in Florida is right, 55-45, that's not, I think that would not be considered strong enough for President Bush. All the Cuban Americans in Florida, he carried them by better than 4-1. The other Hispanic Americans are more Democratic, but I think they wanted to get...
there are a lot more of them, though, since 2000.
They wanted to get 60%. I was told that the Hispanic Americans in Cuba, 55 would make it a little dicey, I think.
Well, and the veterans total, we were given to believe that that even though
Kerry wasn't veterans, it was military families, wasn't it?
No, I thought it was veterans anyway.
Military families, but that would include, no doubt, some veterans.
But 47 for Kerry is pretty good. I mean,
right.
Military families especially, even more than veterans, because Kerry is a veteran, but military families were thought to be even more strongly for Bush than 52%.
Indeed, they were. So, well, we still haven't had a switch, though, have we?
I mean, that's a key point that Fred, I know we're going to dump on Fred all evening because of his sellout to the journalistic establishment, but he did make one good point tonight, I want to say.
Thank you, Al.
Anytime, Fred.
Look, Fred always makes good points.
He does. He does. He just surrounds them in a whole lot of genuflecting to the journalistic establishment as you desperately trying to keep his credentials. As you pointed out. Look, I mean, Bush, if he won every state that he won 4 years ago, he would have 278 electoral votes. Even if he loses, let's say, New Hampshire, it's 274, 269, 270 is the majority, 269, 269, Bush wins, assuming Republicans could keep control of the House.
Now, why do you say the 269 to 269?
Because then it goes to the House of Representatives, which vote by state units, and Republicans do control and are very, very likely to control more than 26 of the state units in the House of Representatives.
Okay.
So Bush needs 269, which means means, as Fred said, Kerry has to take a Bush state, and probably a big Bush state, and probably Florida and Ohio. So the truth is, I think
Florida and Ohio.
Florida or Ohio.
Or Ohio.
And or unless Bush starts taking Kerry's, Gore states, and then it gets more complicated, and then there are other states at play. So it's worrisome if one is a Bush supporter that we haven't been able to call a state like Virginia or North Carolina yet, both of which closed early. But there's no evidence yet that Kerry has taken a Bush state.
And if you think about what we just saw in Florida, we're talking about the Hispanic vote. The big change in the state of Florida since 2000 has been the growth in non-Cuban Hispanics, especially in that I-4 corridor that goes through the middle of the state. So you look back and you see an area like around Tampa, Hillsborough County. Bush won over Gore there about 50 to 47. If you start to see a change there, you go in towards Orlando, Orange County. Gore won there 50 to 48. If that starts to change, you're going to see a big change in the way the Hispanic vote has been producing in the state of Florida. Now, what the campaigns had been saying up until this point is, given that it was nationally about 65% of the Hispanic vote that went for Gore last time, the idea was to keep it below that and Kerry would be in good shape. What do the numbers show so far? 55% for Bush in Florida. That 55%, given the presence of that strong Hispanic community, a community that Jeb Bush has really close ties to, that's bad news for President Bush.
Yeah, well, I think it is, but I would remind you all that that is an exit poll. That's not an actual vote, and exit polls are not what elections are decided on. It's true about Jeb Bush, and I think the president has never done as well as his brother. When Jeb ran for re-election and won by 13 points in 2002, he won a whopping majority of the Cuban-American vote and a majority of the non-Cuban Hispanic vote. Well, his brother is way below that, according to the exit poll, at least tonight, which will make it harder for him to win Florida.
We're going to take a break here, but as we do, let's take a look at the national popular vote count as we have it at this moment in the presidential race. 56-43 for Bush, still only a scant 4% of the precincts in, still millions of people reflected in that number, and don't you forget it. We'll be right back. We got a call we can make now in New Hampshire, where polls have been closed for a while. We can now project Judd Gregg, favorite incumbent, to win that. That's not a shift. He's a Republican senator, son of the late Hugh Gregg, who was the first President Bush's campaign manager in that state 24 years ago. Now, how's that for a piece of useless trivia? Let's check in now with Fox News anchor Martha McCallum for an update on these races and some others. Martha?
Hi there, Britt. Thank you. One of the interesting questions at the end of tonight will be whether or not John Edwards made the right decision when he gave up his Senate seat in North Carolina. Let's take a look at what is going on in that state for a moment here. We have Richard Burr versus Erskine Bowles, who is, of course, the OMB director for President Bush. 52-46 right now. That's with 6% of the precincts reporting. And remember, a lot of people thought that John Edwards might not hold on to his seat had he decided to stay in North Carolina. So we'll see what the future holds for him tonight. There's a look at South Carolina, which we have now projected the winner for the presidential race there as President Bush, but it is still too close to call between Inez Tenenbaum and Jim DeMint there. And Kentucky, this one getting a little bit closer, tightening up with 71% of the precincts in for the incumbent Jim Bunning, 49%. Former professional baseball player versus he's known as Dr. Dan Mongiardo there in Kentucky. Here's Ohio. The U.S. Senate race has been called for George Voinovich. He's the incumbent there with 59% against Eric Fingerhut in Ohio. Here's a look at the Vermont race. Vermont loves its independents, Jim Jeffords and Bernie Sanders. He's getting reelected tonight with 71% of the vote in Vermont, which has also gone for for Senator Kerry, excuse me, with just 5% of that vote coming in right now. But that race has been called. Georgia. Here's a look at Marshall versus Clay. This is the second time that these two have gone head-to-head. Marshall won the last time in a very tight race. He looks to be ahead right now with 61%. That's just 12% of those precincts reporting right now for Georgia. And here's a look at the North Carolina governor race. Ballantyne versus Easley. Easley is the incumbent. He is at 59% with 6% in, but that race is being called as well as expected. No big surprise there. West Virginia governor race being called for Joe Manchin at this point with 73%. 6% in West Virginia. So that's a look at some of the races, and we'll keep you posted. Brett, back to you.
All right, Martha, thanks very much. We're now able to project a couple of states that we've been wondering about for the presidency. In North Carolina, we project the president has won there, and we project that the president has indeed won the state of Virginia, ending the speculation, presumably, at this table about why those states which seem so certain to go for the president hadn't. Well, now they have. And for some sense of how all this news is affecting the Bush camp, let us check in with Fox News senior White House correspondent Jim Angle. Jim?
Hello, Brett. We're here with Ken Melman, the campaign manager for Bush Cheney 04, and obviously the Bush campaign has a lot of questions about those exit polls we've been talking about all night, and they're a little bit suspicious, I think it's fair to say, isn't it, Ken, about some of the numbers we've seen.
Well, we'll see how they hold up.
Now, you're looking at Florida,
yes,
and you're, in fact, arguing that you're doing way better in Florida in some particular areas than you were in 2000.
Yeah, you remember the famous I-4 corridor. It goes between Orlando and Tampa. A lot of swing voters there. Pasco County is a county that's in the Tampa Bay area. In the 2000 campaign, we got 48% of the vote. We're now in the mid-50s there with 72% reporting. Go over to Orlando to Orange County, a county that in the 2000 campaign was seen as bellwether. We lost it in 2000. We're winning it in the mid-50s again this time. Go up to Gainesville, to Alachua County. It's a Democrat county. Last time we got 39% of the vote. This time we're getting 48% of the vote. So when the real numbers come in, what they show is that we're doing better in Florida, better in the swing areas, even better in the Democratic areas than we did in 2000.
Now, it also shows, the exit polls, that you're doing quite well among Hispanics, which the exit polls suggest are a larger portion of the electorate in Florida this year than they were in 2000.
That's exactly right. We won Hispanics barely last time, and it shows we're winning them by a much bigger margin this time. Here's what else we know about Florida. In the 2000 campaign, we came out with a net about 98,000 advantage on absentee ballots. This time, that advantage is likely to be 150,000, could even be larger, could be as high as 200,000. So all of the actual indicators in Florida are very good right now.
But you also had early voting this time, and the Democrats obviously hope to make up some of that margin in the early voting.
They may make some of it, but I'm confident we're going to go into an election day with a big lead, 40, 50,000, even more when you add early and absentee.
All right, very quickly, Ohio, what's the outlook?
Ohio, I think we look very good. Our folks are reporting high turnout statewide. If you look at the absentee ballot numbers, they've come in from Cuyahoga County, same as in 2000, no great advantage for the Democrats, and they're a fortress part of the state.
Okay, that's the word here from the Bush Cheney campaign. Back to you, Britt.
All right, Jim, thanks very much. We'll be checking in shortly with the Kerry campaign as well. We got a couple of things to update you on. The calls we've just been made, which have made a change in that electoral vote count in the bottom left-hand of your screen, left-hand corner of your screen. We called North Carolina for President Bush. We are projecting the president the winner in Virginia as well. No surprise in either of those cases. The only surprise was it took as long as it did. We're also projecting another incumbent Democrat will win in the Senate. That is Blanche Lincoln of Arkansas. That represents no change, obviously, she being an incumbent. So let us now check in with our chief political correspondent, Carl Cameron, who's with the Kerry campaign in Boston. Carl?
Thanks very much, Britt. We're here with Joe Lockhart, senior advisor to the Kerry campaign. 9 weeks ago, you joined up, and you find yourself here on election night. And we've just called the states of Virginia and North Carolina for the president. North Carolina, interesting, obviously, because Senator Edwards is giving up a Senate seat. Any surprise to you there in the losses to the president?
Well, I mean, the president has been strong in Virginia and North Carolina, that part of the country. I think John Edwards added a lot for us as far as strength there. I think it's significant that it took an hour in those states that the president was comfortably thought he'd win. But, you know, listen, we concentrated our efforts in the Midwest, the upper Midwest, Florida, and then in the Southwest, because that's where this is going to be decided.
Let's talk about Ohio. What's going to be the determining factor in the Buckeye State tonight?
Well, listen, I think the economy is the single biggest issue there. They had such terrible job loss there. I think the second thing is, if you go around to the college towns there, you see a lot of kids out voting. I think that's not only in Ohio, but in the country. We're going to look at this as this is the election that young people in this country, 18 to 25, got engaged, and got registered, and got out and voted.
Now, just a few moments ago, we heard Mark Mellman, the campaign chairman for President Bush, talking about strength with Hispanics. Senator Kerry spent a lot of time emphasizing the African-American vote in the last month. Statistically, what do you see as happening there?
Well, I think very strong turnout, very strong support. I think probably over 90% for John Kerry. I think we did well in the Hispanic community also. I think if you put those three things together, the young people, the new registrants, African Americans, Hispanics, as well as several other constituencies, that's why we think we're so confident tonight.
You and other senior Kerry aides today have been downplaying voter irregularities, steering clear of discussion of litigation. I guess the answer is obvious, but why don't you tell us why?
Well, listen, we think the system has worked today. There were thousands of lawyers deployed to make sure that no one tried to take advantage or unfair advantage, and by and large it's worked. I've seen very few reports of irregularities, and even the ones we've seen, after a little investigation, you find that there's not much going on.
So when will we see Senator Kerry, and what will he be saying down here tonight?
Well, I think you're going to have to stand by both on the timing and the content.
Is there any doubt in your mind that if this is a disputed race, Senator Kerry will still speak tonight?
Well, listen, I think I just saw it's beginning to rain here a little bit. There are 10,000 of his friends. He knows most of them. It's getting a little cold. He'll come down here and say hello to them.
Are you prepared to say you're going to win tonight right now?
I'm prepared to say we ought to stand by for a while. I want to do something for your ratings. Stay watching.
Well, there you go, Britt. Stay watching. I don't think I could possibly say anything more smart than that.
You know, Carl, I've known Joe Lockhart for a long time. I've always been fond of him. Would you pass along my personal warmest regards to him?
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Carl, very much. All right, let's take a look now at some states that we are watching closely but can't project. Florida, we still can't. Totals mounting up there, almost 30% of the precincts in. Pennsylvania as well. This must be coming in slow. We don't even have any sense of how much of the raw vote is available from Pennsylvania. Similarly, New Hampshire. Surprising that we haven't been able to call Missouri, perhaps. That's one the president is supposed to win. Really, the Kerry people kind of conceded it a long time ago. He hadn't been in there or spent any money in there in a long time. But Mississippi, we'd love to know what's going on there. Nobody thinks in America, I don't think, thinks Kerry will win Mississippi, but we can't call it yet. So we're just waiting and watching. And while we do that, we're going to take a brief break, but we're going to be right back, and we'll delve further into some of these states that have been so far too close to call. Stay tuned. We're going to check in with our colleague Brian Wilson down in Washington for some sense of just an overall picture of these Senate races. Brian?
Well, you know, there are really about 9 races that are very competitive. It really could come down to how these 9 races come out. The current balance of the Senate, as you know, is razor thin. It's 51, 48, and 1. But let's go through some of the competitive races tonight. We won't have a chance to go through all of them, but here are some of the ones to watch as the night progresses. We may not get this one for quite a while. This is Lisa Murkowski. She's currently filling the seat that was once filled by her dad. That's been controversial there. Tony Knowles, a former Democratic governor. But the polls closed very late in Alaska, and there are a lot of absentee ballots that may take some time to count. If it's close as the night goes on, that may take a while. Colorado, boy, this is a close race. Pete Coors, who's a beer baron, he's the great-grandson of Adolph Coors, going against the Attorney General Ken Salazar. We'll expect this to be a late night on this race as well. The numbers will be going very late, and the race is very tight. In the state of Florida right now, we have had some numbers here, but it's still very close to call. Right now, 52% for Martinez, 46% for Betty Castor. Martinez, the former Secretary of HUD. Betty Castor is, of course, a superintendent of education in the state of Florida, former superintendent, and this is going to be a tight race to watch all night long. Now we go on to, this is the most interesting race of the night. Some of the northern precincts in Kentucky have not yet come in, and that's where Bunning is supposed to be strong. But right now, Mongiardo, a doctor from the Appalachians, is doing very well, 51 to 49. Bunning, 73-year-old, had some missteps throughout this campaign. This is, again, one very close to watch. We have to explain this kind of complicated situation in Louisiana. You got to get more than 50% to win, and although Mr. Vitter, David Vitter, is doing very well, he's the Republican candidate in the polls, he's got a couple of Democratic Democratic candidates. There will be a runoff here, and if it's a very close race in the Senate, we may have to wait a while to find out where the control is, because Louisiana will have, more than likely, a runoff after tonight. And let's go to North Carolina, where we have another pretty interesting race here. We have a Representative Richard Burr up against Erskine Bowles. Richard Burr has been leading in some of the polls, but only by a slight margin. Erskine Bowles, of course, is the former chief of staff to Bill Clinton. This, again, a very close race and one to watch throughout the night. We'll have some more to come to you with a little bit later. Britt, back to you.
All right, Brian, thanks very much. That is an interesting, you know, we've been doing this sort of piecemeal here with these Senate races, but we've got 9 of them to go, and you know, that really count, only 9, and the Democrats would have to win something like, what, 7 of them, right, in order to take control of the place.
They'd really have to win that Kentucky race, I think, and it's extremely close. But as Brian said, the vote that's out, or Republicans think the vote that is out, is in northern Kentucky, which is the congressional district that Jim Bunning used to represent. It's a rural vote, and he's obviously going to do better in the rural areas than he is in downtown Louisville.
It has been a race that he should not have. I mean, I don't think many political experts would judge that this is a race where Jim Bunning should have been in any trouble.
He's run one of the poorest campaigns in the country, and that's why he's in trouble. I mean, Dan Morgiano, nobody had ever heard of. He was sort of a sacrificial lamb. That was the idea when they put him up. You know, originally it was going to be the governor, Paul Patton, the former governor, who was going to run against Jim Bunning, and then he got in a lot of trouble. He was a Democrat, got in a lot of trouble.
He was very popular as governor.
Extremely popular, and got involved in a scandal involving a woman and some, well, I won't go into it. But in any case, Patton decided not to run, and so Morgiano was the sacrificial lamb, and it turned out he's a pretty strong one.
Jim Bunning's theory was that if you pitch a no-hitter in both leagues, in the American League and the National League, you shouldn't really, you should be a shoo-in.
Well,
and
look,
I think
he was a shoo-in for a while.
He should be, absolutely. Could I just say one thing? Since I think I misstated the situation on Hispanics in Florida earlier. Bush seems to be running, according to these exit polls, 55-45 ahead. He seems to have won Hispanics in 2000, 50-48. So though someone had once, someone had told me, gee, we hope to get 60, but I should have checked the numbers, and he seems to be doing well. You know, Ken Melman's interview was very interesting, I think, here. And if you look only at states whose polls have closed, so we can talk about those, look at the exit poll data we were given. Now, it's only a poll. Obviously, there's a big margin of error. We're cautioned not to base anything on it, and that's why we're not calling states based on it. But if we look at what the exit polls thought the results would be in states, and look at a state like Virginia, which we've now called, where Bush is now ahead, I believe, by about 10-11% in the popular vote, and I don't think we would have called it unless we think he's going to end up 5-6 ahead at least. There's a gap, at least in a couple of states, between what the exit polls were suggesting, which in some of these states was not so good for President Bush, and what the actual vote coming in is suggesting. It will be fascinating and amazing if the exit poll has polls, which are a big, huge professional production, have systematically erred in undercounting President Bush's vote. It seems to be the case in a couple of states that have closed already. You know, Virginia was one reason we were so hesitant, I think, to call Virginia is what we do is we take the exit polls and we match it up with the precincts. If the precincts confirm the exit polls, we figure, okay, the exit poll is right. In this case, the precincts didn't confirm the exit polls. The precincts showed the actual raw vote showed a Bush victory, and indeed Bush seems to be going to a victory in Virginia. There are other states where exit polls show polls, other states whose polls are closed, where the exit polls suggest a Kerry victory, where the raw data may not confirm what the exit polls suggest.
The other part, though, of that interview was I thought he looked like a man in high anxiety. Well, a man trying to disprove what the numbers would appear to him.
Not at all. I know Ken Melman very well. That was the Norman Ken Melman. And he said normal. That's what I'm trying to say. N-O-R-M-A-L. Right. The regular guy that we've talked to before. Orange County is in central Florida. It's Orlando, a very populous area, where he said with 3/4 of the vote counted, Bush was getting about the mid-50s, around 55%. Bush lost that county by 2 points to Al Gore in 2000. If he's doing that much better in Orange County, then he may be doing better than the exit poll.
Right. I thought that Melman was quite persuasive, actually, both on the Hispanic point and on the Orange County point, and then the other counties that he mentioned. And you know, the exit polls did indicate that that Kerry was going to win, and they could be wrong.
All right, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, more to come on all this data. Stay tuned.
You decide 2004.
One of the reasons there was some consternation today about the exit polling results that had come in, which indicated to a lot of people that Senator Kerry was doing well better than expected, was that by the end of the day, it appeared that 54% more women were 54% of those represented in the exit poll, sampled in the exit poll, were women, and the rest obviously men. That's obviously not the breakdown in the population, and probably not the breakdown in the voting population. So the question arises, why would that be? Well, let's check in now with one of our favorite contributors, Fox News contributor Susan Estrich, law professor, writer, columnist, and all-around political master know-it-all. Just kidding, Susan. What do you think about this?
Well, I don't know. Why would that be? Maybe more women are voting.
Well, you got me on that. What is your take on it?
I don't know. I'm the one who brought that number up to you guys, and it suggests to me, I don't know if it's 54%, but what I'm hearing is that in a number of states you're seeing a very high turnout of women. Even in Florida, I just caught the end of your conversation, but what I'm hearing out of Florida from some people down there is they're seeing a much higher turnout and much stronger Kerry support in some traditionally Republican counties in Florida. So we'll have to wait and see, obviously, but I think what you have to say right now is that either the exit polls, by and large, are completely wrong, or George Bush loses.
How's that?
Well, I mean, I'm just talking to the pollsters back who I'm talking to, and the exit polls are not coming in very well for George Bush tonight.
Right.
And so you have to just say, I mean, there are years in which exit polls have been wrong. So I think you and your panel can continue to do as you've done tonight, and you may be right, and parse these exit polls and point out that they may indeed be wrong, and people should stay tuned. But the view in Boston seems to be that if the exit polls are right, then it's going to be very difficult for George Bush to pull this off tonight.
Right. Well, talk to us, if you can, Susan, about I mean, you've been through these national election nights a number of times, with a bunch of times, and you have been throughout this year, I think, as keen as anybody on what the trends were, and we're beginning now to see some of this raw vote come in, and it does appear that based on the fact that we're making some calls now in states where we seem to be able to make them, even though the exit polls pointed either the other way or had them very much closer. Does that give you any?
Brett. I mean, I've been through this the whole time, and I think without hanging anything on it, I think I've been right every time. And I've been right every time because my old pollster, who's actually Kerry's pollster, told me always believe bad polls, and when the polls are against you, believe it. So what's happened this year is that the polls by and large have been pretty good, and the polls by and large have pushed Kerry when he won, and he's won consistently. So tonight what's going on is obviously we'll know more later, but the polls have consistently showed in the last few days a trend in Kerry's direction. Obviously our Fox poll showed that. Now it's possible, Bill Kristol and the rest of the guys, that all these polls tonight are wrong, and we can wait and see that Bush is reelected. But if the trend we're seeing in these polls is correct, then I think it's going to be very tough for Bush to pull this off tonight, but he may do it.
Well, in fact, though, actually, I mean, you're absolutely right about our poll in the last few days, particularly our weekend rolling average tracking poll. But other polls, I mean, as it came out at the end, the other polls, Washington Post, even Zogby in the last couple of days, were ticking. It was very slight, Susan. You and I can agree.
Yeah, they were ticking, but Zogby has come out and said that he thinks these polls are pushing in Kerry's direction.
Right. I understand that, but that's not what his numbers showed. And I'm just wondering whether, I mean, is this a case of whether we believe only the polls we like, or whether we...
I'm wide open here, but I'm just asking you, ask me what I hear, and what I'm hearing from Boston coming out of these exit polls is a very simple message. Either the exit polls we're seeing tonight are wrong, which they may be, or George Bush is going to have a very, very, very difficult time winning tonight.
Well, I think that a lot of people would agree with you, Susan. When I referred to you earlier as a know-it-all, I didn't mean...
I don't mean I'm a know-it-all. They could be wrong.
Hear me out. Hear me out. I didn't mean that as a put-down. I meant that as a suggestion to our viewers as to how knowledgeable you have always been, and I thank you for that. We're going to take a brief break right now. When we come back, more from the results as they come in.
You Decide 2004 coverage is brought to you by Pacific Life, offering insurance, annuities, and investment.
Susan Estridge made an interesting point based on the exit polling as we saw it, and of course, I think it's fair now to say that the exit polling showed President Bush trailing in Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, a state he's clearly lost now, and a bunch of other states. And so it states, in some sense, it states the obvious to say that if he lost all those states, it'd be difficult for him to win. But of course, there were other currents in the exit polls as well, which made it appear, at least apart from just the projections or the horse race numbers, that it was a more complex picture. But perhaps not.
I mean, I spent all afternoon telling Republican friends of mine, exit polls are usually right. You know, these people know what they're doing. They know they have good models. If the polls look bad, don't kid yourself and don't. I very much agree with Susan Estridge. Believe bad polls and don't. You know, politics isn't about wishes. It's about facts. Having said that, we now have some facts. I just talked with someone who's been in touch with people in Florida. Melman may be slightly overstating the Bush numbers in the vote. He said the person I just spoke to, who just looked at the latest tally, says Bush is running around 51 or 52% in Orlando, but I think he only ran 48% in 2000. So there may be some actual empirical evidence here. It's not a matter of wishing one way or the other. We know that in a couple of states, in Virginia, it looks like in North Carolina, Bush is outperforming the exit polls. If you can do that in Florida and especially in Ohio, it remains unclear whether Kerry can take one of the big states away from Bush. Without that, it could be a very long night. But you know, it could be that the exit polls end up being basically correct. And if they are, it's not as long a night, but not a cheerful night for Republicans.
Okay, let me just make a couple of, we're able to make a couple of calls here, no great surprise in either. Well, one of them is an important one. This is Tom Coburn, the Republican congressman who had been thought to be in some fairly serious trouble against an attractive challenger, Brad Carson, in that race. That is a seat that Republicans very much needed to hold, and it appears that they've done so tonight. Dr. Coburn got himself in trouble with a lot of statements that were deemed impolitic at best. This is a call we're making with only 3% in, but we believe he's the winner. We also believe the Indiana Democratic Governor Kernan is going to win that seat out there. So we believe now. I'm sorry, we're misreporting that. That board was wrong. We're reporting that Mitch Daniels. We're projecting that Mitch Daniels, who is the former OMB chief for President Bush, is the winner tonight. There's another former OMB chief or former chief of staff on the. There's the board, and there's the right answer. Half the precincts are in. We project Mitch Daniels the winner in that race out there in Indiana. That's the governor's race out there in Indiana. We're coming up here on 9 o'clock in about 45 seconds. There's a slew of poll closings. We're going to have some results for you, and there's some fairly big states in play here. Polls are closing in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Colorado, New Mexico, all battleground states, so we'll have something to tell you about the state of the race in those two places as well. Some Senate races we're going to be able to call for you, or not call, but at least report on as well. So stay with us for the next few seconds here, and we'll be able to run down all of that for you. And we're just about 10 seconds away. A number of these remain too close to call, but there are within them some interesting ones. So as the 9 o'clock hour arrives, we can tell you that in Michigan, the presidential race remains too close to call. As you can see, only 1% of the precincts are reporting that we have so far. Similar situation as well in Minnesota. And same thing, Wisconsin, all three, too close to call, all three battleground states. Colorado, another important state, one the president needs to hold, too close. New Mexico, this was a blue state, a Gore state, too close to call. Louisiana, this would be a state the president would need to win and to hold, too close. You see just the precincts are a lot of them. It says 77% are in, and it's 11 to 11. I think we can throw out that data and wait for better data later. In New York, we project no surprise here. Big trove of electoral votes, but no surprise. John Kerry, the winner in New York. And another big electoral prize, President Bush, the winner, no surprise there in his home state of Texas. South Dakota for president, we project no surprise here. The president will win. The question is whether he'll carry the Republican challenger in the Senate over. Nebraska, very red state. President wins also Kansas. These are all states he won before, these last two. Arizona, we're saying Arizona's too close to call. That hasn't been a very heavily contested state, but the president certainly expected to win there, but not able to make a call yet. We are calling Wyoming, Dick Cheney's home state, for the president, projecting him the winner in that state, along with Dick Cheney, of course. North Dakota, this is not a surprise either, projection for the president. And in Rhode Island, we say John Kerry is the projected winner there. So you add, and some Senate calls here. Can't call, the polls have closed in South Dakota, can't call the Daschle-Thune race. That could be a very late night on that one. Also, we can't call the Colorado U.S. Senate race. That would be a pickup for the Democrats if they got it. Haven't got it yet. Tight race out there. Louisiana Senate, that's a three-way deal. The question really tonight is whether Vitter, the Republican, can get 50%, and we can't tell you that yet. If he got 50%, then he could avoid a runoff. Otherwise, we won't know about that race until sometime in December. Vitter is clearly going to be the Republican nominee. The question is which of these other two chaps he'd have to run against. Chris John is favored to be his opponent if it comes to that, but we'll see. Kansas, Sam Brownback, he's the incumbent Republican senator. He has won, we project. We project John McCain an easy winner as well in Arizona. Byron Dorgan, Democratic incumbent, winning in North Dakota. Russ Feingold, the incumbent in Wisconsin. I believe we're projecting him the winner, although that board does not show that. So if that's not true, I'll check back with you on it. And we project Chuck Schumer, the incumbent Democratic senator in New York, a winner as well. So, and we'll just take a quick look back at that Oklahoma Senate race where we believe that Tom Coburn, the incumbent congressman, will be a winner there. That race looked like it was not going to pan out for a while for Coburn. Brad Carson did a good job, the Democratic challenger. Coburn said some things that you might not want to be going around saying if you were in a political race, but...
Yeah, but he also said some things, obviously, that people in Oklahoma like. One, he's a very popular obstetrician, a guy who honored his pledge as a House member to serve only 3 terms. Remember, we know some of them who've said, you know, America needs me, I'm going to have to stay in Congress. But he didn't. He said he'd serve only 3 terms in the House, and he did, retired, went back to Oklahoma, announced late, won overwhelmingly in the primary. But the main thing he has done is portray himself as the guy who will go to Washington and blow the whistle on spending. And his opponent, Brad Carson, said, well, he's not going to get all the pork that we usually get in Oklahoma. Why, he voted against some of that when he was in the House of Representatives, which was absolutely true. And yet I think voters there decided that they wanted somebody. We've had these guys over the years in the House of Representatives, you know, the people that really just stand out on the floor and try to block spending. H.R. Gross from Iowa years ago. And this is the way Coburn has portrayed himself, I think accurately, and people seem to like it. But he's also going to be helped, of course, because Bush will win Oklahoma overwhelmingly.
Let's check in on Michael Barone, who's down with our decision desk, who might be able to give us some insights into why some of the states remain uncalled. Michael?
Well, Florida is one state that very much remains uncalled this year, unlike 2000 when it was called both ways, and as we have admitted, never should have been called on either side. And Britt, what I've been doing is taking a look at while the others are taking a look at the screens on the decision screens, looking at the exit poll and the models that it produces, I'm looking at some actual voting returns. And what I found is a very interesting story, which tends to substantiate what Ken Mellman, the Bush campaign manager, said last time. And that is that in counties in northern, central, and I-4 corridor of Florida, we are seeing many of the counties middle-of-the-road Republican. We're seeing big increases in turnout. I took a look at the counties where 94% of more people actually voted. And what I found was that in Flagler County, for example, just south of Jacksonville, 42% increase in turnout, and Bush went from 46.5 to 51%. So he turned a 1,200 vote Democratic margin into a 1,000 61-vote Republican margin. Pasco County in that I corridor just north of Tampa and St. Petersburg with a high elderly population, that's gone up. The turnout went up from 142,000 to 201,000, and that's with 95% of the votes counted. That's a 41% increase, and when the final votes are counted, it's even more. More important, Bush's percentage went from a losing 48% to a winning 53.9%. So the Republican organizational efforts and 72-hour program seems to have produced dividends. Now, I should add a cautionary note, which is that we have not had substantial any returns showing in the state board from Broward to Palm Beach counties. Those are the two heavily Democratic counties that went 68-31 and 61-35, I believe, in 2000 for Al Gore. So registration is up somewhat in those counties. Turnout may be up, and that may offset some of the gains in Republican margin here. But this is pretty significant. Clay County up 11%. That's a 75% Republican county. 75% for Bush, up from 73%. Marion County up 15%. It's gone from 55 Bush to 59 Bush. Bradford County up 25%. One of those rural North Florida counties used to be so heavily Democratic, nobody voted in the Republican primary at all. That's gone from 62% Bush to 70% Bush. Citrus County, that's north of Pasco and Hernando on the Gulf Coast. That county has gone up, turnout up 21% from 52% Republican to 57%. That's kind of modest income retirees, some old new dealers there. And so that trend says that the Republicans are squeezing more votes out of a lot of these counties and could win Florida.
All right, Michael, very interesting, because, of course, that was one of the states where the exit polling that we had suggested he might not be able to win.
Why don't we just tell people what the exit polling says and then start to match it up against these things? And in Florida, the exit polls predicted that that Kerry was going to win by 52 to 48, and as Michael and Melman were saying, that doesn't seem to be running along with the actual vote totals in these various counties. So that suggests that conceivably that the exit polls might be wrong. Similarly, in Ohio, the exit polls came up with 52-47 for Kerry. We'll have to see what happens there. If the results start coming in at less than that, then we may have troubles with the exit polls. Pennsylvania, which is also closed, the exit poll said it was going to be a fantastic 58-42, which would be a whopping margin for Kerry. And again, we'll have to see because we don't have enough.
Well, it was enough of a margin, and we called it almost immediately.
Well, I know, but it's the question of the actual margin that we get. I mean, that's an enormous would be an enormous victory for Kerry if it happens. Wisconsin, the exit poll said that Kerry was going to win by 53-47. I mean, state after state after state, the presumption was that Kerry was beginning to run the board. There are other states that aren't in yet, but those are the states that are in, and we all came here thinking, wow, it looked like Kerry was going to take all these places, and now there's some doubt about it.
And it remains the case, we shouldn't overcomplicate this, Kerry needs to take 10 electoral votes away that Bush had from states Bush had in 2000. His best bet to do it, he could take New Hampshire with 4. He probably has a shot in Arkansas, Nevada. Those are 6 and 5.
Who?
Kerry. Yeah, outside shot.
Right.
But basically his best shot is, and let's assume Bush doesn't pick up much in the way of Kerry states at all, of Gore states at all. His best shot remains Florida or Ohio. Florida, Mike, there's a big caveat to what Mike Barone was saying, which is we don't know what the real vote is from South Florida. If it's huge, and if Kerry has pushed up the Gore margins there, that would could offset, obviously, Bush increasing his margins in the Panhandle or even in the I-4 corridor. And then Ohio remains a big mystery. We don't seem to have much data from Ohio. But it looks like the states we all expected to make the difference. But I would say this. I mean, Kerry seems to be holding his states easily still.
He does. Right.
Pennsylvania, if you had asked me a day ago, I would have said Bush has as good a chance to take Pennsylvania away from the Democrats as Kerry has to take Ohio away from the Republicans. Pennsylvania is safely in the Democratic camp, and Ohio is still up for grabs.
The Bush campaign thought 3 states, Kerry states, were the most vulnerable. And the most vulnerable among those is Wisconsin. Secondly, Iowa, and then New Mexico. Those are the 3 the 3 blue states, Gore states, that they thought they had a chance to take.
They also thought they had a shot at Pennsylvania.
Well, they thought they had an outside shot at Pennsylvania, but they were more optimistic about Wisconsin, Iowa, and New Mexico. We haven't heard the final word from them. And if he takes any of those, it would offset any gains he might make in Bush states.
So all day long today, it's been interesting to watch the stock market, which was up, and then about mid-afternoon, about the time, folks, that the exit polls began to get into the hands of newsies around the country who were not supposed to say anything about them. And of course, they always do. They always leak. They began to leak. The market began to react, and Neil Cavuto can bring us up to date on how it all happened, and what the pattern was, and what it might be. Neil?
It was really fascinating, Britt, because I know you guys are trying to analyze here what's going on in the polls and the data we're getting for every state. But early on, the market, which some say is a fairly good sort of handicapper in its own right for market events, not always accurate, but by and large has a good batting percentage of close to 700 on these things. We did see a big drop-off very late in the day on this whisper that had come off some of the blogs that Senator Kerry was doing very well in some of these exit polls, and we had a 78-point gain in the Dow, which reversed itself to ultimately a 17-point decline we had today. Now, Britt, you and I mentioned this before, but the market has been acting in a rather unusual pattern over the last few weeks. Some say predicting some of the curious things we have going on tonight, but it is important to point out that no incumbent president, be he Democrat or Republican, has gone on to win the presidency or win re-election if the Dow, for example, has not been up either in the prior month or since the end of the last convention, or for that matter, over the course of the last year. On all three counts, the markets are down during that period, which on paper at least would not bode well for the president. There is a fear in this largely Republican bastion, Brett, and I must stress a fear that sometimes isn't borne out by history. As you know, sometimes the markets do quite well under Democrats, that John Kerry in particular would be a problem for the street, that he'd remove some of the tax cuts that are near and dear to them, that he'd take away some of the dividend relief, the capital gains relief, and just the thought that he might be carrying himself to victory when the first hint of that came on hit the stock market very hard today. Now, having said that, I frankly think, Britt, no matter who turns out the winner tonight, if there is clarity for either President Bush or in the event that Kerry wins, a President-elect Kerry, the markets will probably do quite well just getting that uncertainty out of the way. But at the risk of sounding cliche here, we'll wait and see.
Okay, Neil, waiting and seeing is what we're doing, and but a couple of things we can now see. Vermont. We can tell you that we project now that the Republican will win the governorship of Vermont, and in North Dakota, we project there as well that for governor there, the Republican will win there as well. I don't think either of those is a great surprise. We're going to take a brief break now, and when we come back, we'll look ahead further. Stay tuned. That is the list of states there that we have projected a winner. As you can see, red is the Bush states, blue the Kerry states, all of them former Gore states, and the red states are all former Bush states. So nothing has changed hands. And it would be no surprise to anybody who watched the returns or knows the results of 4 years ago that it's now 156 to 112 for President Bush over John Kerry, because each man tonight has held the states that his party won 4 years ago. But we are continuing to analyze exit poll data to try to see whether we can detect trends or interesting reasons why people have done as they've done today. And for that, we turn to Chris Wallace. Chris?
Britt, the states that we can't call are starting to pile up, but we want to look at one of them, Missouri. It's a state that was leaning toward President Bush. In fact, the Kerry campaign pulled its advertising from Missouri about 5 weeks ago, but now it's too close to call, and our exit polls tell us why. Independent voters in Missouri, a quarter of the voters today, are split almost right down the middle. 48% for Kerry, 51% for Bush. Born-again or evangelical Christians are a third of Missouri voters today. 26% support Kerry, 74% support the president. But union households make up 30% of today's voters in Missouri, and they broke 59% for Kerry, 39% for Bush. Were people in Missouri voting for their candidate or against his opponent? 84% of Bush supporters say they supported the president. 14% say they were just voting against Senator Kerry. But look at this. Kerry voters split quite differently. 57% strongly support the Massachusetts senator, but 40% said they were primarily voting against the president. So, the Show Me State of Missouri is still too close to call. The Kerry camp had all but conceded it, and it may well end up in the Bush column, but not without causing a few anxious moments tonight for the Republicans. Brett?
Okay, Chris, very insightful. Thank you very much. Let's review the bidding as we have it here. This has all come down, it seems, interestingly enough, at 9:17 Eastern Time on election night, to the question of whether the exit poll got it right or not. And we have tantalizing indications that perhaps, while the exit polling may have been good on certain questions, indicating voter attitudes and preferences, which is what exit polls were originally designed for, they were never designed to be horse race indicators. And their poll takers who do them have always warned us against treating them as such. But we, being horse race enthusiasts and people who are trying to find out who's going to win, have always ended up paying a great deal of attention on Election Day. And there's one reason for that. It's the first poll of actual voters. Right. Everybody else was likely voters and registered voters and all voters, and all of a sudden we had a sample, a very large sample, as Chris pointed out earlier, 12,000 voters nationally, and we had a horse race number. And it was hard not to pay attention to it.
I mean, Neil Cavuto was absolutely right. I mean, at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, furious phone calls start flying all over the country when the first returns start leaking out. First exit poll return results data come out, and it begins now. The internet bloggers when they get a hold of it, they put it on the web, and there's a whole sort of underground of smart people around trying to prove how smart they are by calling around, and people draw conclusions. If one state after another looks like it's for Kerry, all of a sudden the word goes out across the country that Kerry's going to win this election. And as the returns actually come in, they may be very different, but people inevitably draw conclusions from this. Why did it happen? And start explaining things in terms of polls. Journalists have been doing that forever. I do it myself.
Well, must tell you, we
we
sat there through the primary season in state after state, and we went on the air and we used exit poll data once the polls had closed because it was all we had, and it would be all we had. And we only had one race in most of these places. It was the presidential race. We paid attention to some primaries and so forth, and we used exit poll data, and it never let us down.
Well, that's not the case anymore, though, Britt, but it did affect, it's not just us and people in the media. Why was the Kerry campaign enthusiastic all afternoon? Because of the exit poll, which showed him winning. Why was the Bush campaign down in the dumps? Because the exit poll showed that they were going to lose. But remember, these exit polls have not always been right. Bush, for instance, in 2000, the exit poll showed Gore winning Florida by 3%. It turned out it was virtually a dead heat.
But wait a minute.
In 2002, the whole system collapsed. I remember the one in Colorado. The first exit poll showed Wayne Allard losing by 20 points, the senator from Colorado.
Having to scrap the whole thing. Well, we're hoping that won't happen. We're hoping the exit poll turns out to be a reliable indicator because we need it. And we're going to take a brief break. When we come back, Martha McCallum will update us on a number of races. Stay tuned. Okay, let's take a look, just to run down this long list of states where polls have closed but races can't yet be determined. Florida, you see the president leading in raw vote there. A lot of precincts in, but not able to make a call there yet. Too close to call still. Pennsylvania is the same thing. Kerry overwhelmingly ahead, but you see it's only 7% of the vote is in Pennsylvania, so it's way too soon to call on the basis of that. New Hampshire, We've got some vote in. Narrowly Kerry ahead, but no call available to us there either. No projection yet in Missouri. President narrowly ahead, only 9% of the vote in. Precincts reporting, I should say. Same thing, similar situation in Mississippi. That's supposed to be a sure Bush state. 8% in, not enough to make a projection yet. Missouri, similar situation. The president slightly ahead in what's in, but as you see there, only 9%. We got this. Well, we're going to go back and forth, it appears, between these two states, Mississippi and Missouri. We've explained that as best we can. We have a similar situation in Michigan, in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. So we'll await those updates on those when we have a little bit more to tell you. In the meantime, let's check in with Martha McCallum, who will run us down on some other races. Martha?
Hi there, Britt. Well, one thing we do know about what the president is up to tonight, he has just put in a phone call to Johnny Isakson, who will take over Zell Miller's Democratic seat in Georgia. Isakson is a Republican, and the president has called to congratulate him on that. Let's take a look at some of the other races where some longtime incumbent senators are turning over their seat when this election is over. There is the Oklahoma race. Democrats were fairly optimistic about Brad Carson in this race, but Tom Coburn looks to be the winner in that race with just 13% of the precincts in, feeling pretty confident about calling that one. Here is Florida, very tight race, 48-50, favoring Martinez at this point with 54% of those precincts in, Martinez being one of two Hispanic Senate candidates who are out there this time, including Ken Salazar. And let's take a look at the next race, which is Illinois. Barack Obama, 81%. We knew that this would be a big swing in favor of Barack Obama, who has been running against Alan Keyes. That's a Republican seat that was held by Peter Fitzgerald, who was a one-time senator in the state of Illinois. All right, let's take a look at North Carolina. This is John Edwards' seat. Erskine Bowles, who is up for that seat, 47%, 52% for Richard Burr, the congressman for North Carolina. That's 20% of the precinct reporting there. And let's move along to Kentucky, which has been very interesting. Seems to be tightening up a bit. 91% of those precincts in. We understood that some of the ones that were coming in later may be in favor of Jim Bunning, who's the incumbent in Kentucky, and it does look to be tightening a bit in Kentucky. We'll continue to follow that. Alabama looks to be called for Richard Shelby, who is the incumbent there, 61%, with 10% of those precincts reported. Pennsylvania is shaping up to look very interesting. 13% of these precincts coming in. Arlen Specter, thought to be somewhat invincible in Pennsylvania. The administration putting their support behind him in the primary race, 36% for Specter, but Huffle is at 61%. Joe Huffle in Pennsylvania, so that's one to keep an eye on closely tonight as well. Connecticut, this is another one that nobody thought would be close. Diane Farrell putting in a pretty good showing here at 42% right now. Only 6% of the precincts are in, but Chris Shea is thought to be a little bit more vulnerable in Connecticut that many people would have expected in the early going. And that's a look at some of those races. We expect to get a little bit of information coming in about South Dakota, the very important Tom Daschle, John Thune race going on there, and also Colorado. We should be getting some results in for the next time around. Brett, back to you.
Okay, Martha, thanks very much. Let's check in with Greta Van Susteren, who is keeping us up to date on some of the other issues that we'll be facing tonight. Greta.
Well, one of the issues down in the state of Florida is whether parents have to be notified if their minor children have abortions. In the state of Florida, the voters have spoken. Let's look at the numbers. In the state of Florida, parental notification, yes, 65%, no, 35%. Another big issue, Britt, down in the state of Florida, of course, is those absentee ballots. There may be 80, 90,000 absentee ballots to be counted. Ken Gross is with me right now. Ken, that was a huge problem in 2000, counting these ballots. Huge problem this year?
Well, there's just a lot of them. The sheer volume is going to create a problem if it's as close as it looks like it's going to be, and I don't think they're going to be able to get through them, certainly not tonight.
Judge Napolitano?
Same thing. I mean, if the difference between the president and Senator Kerry is less than the amount of absentee ballots, then there can be no winner until those ballots are counted, and they have to be counted by hand. As well, a number of people asked for absentee ballots, didn't get them, went to the polls and got a provisional ballot. A provisional ballot, they will say, should be counted as if it were an absentee ballot, which means more delay before we know who wins.
All right, we don't know whether or not to be an alarmist until we see the difference between these two candidates down in Florida, but again, could be some trouble down in Florida. We hope not. Back to you, Brett.
All right. Thanks very much, Greta. Very interesting stuff. I can't say that I'm delighted to hear that we might not be able to declare a winner tonight, or we're going to be waiting for days. We've all been through that before. I don't think anybody was excited about repeating it. But while we contemplate that, we'll take a break. On the other side of that break, we may hear from Rudy Giuliani, Barack Obama, one of the new stars of the Democratic Party, may be heard from, and much more. Stay tuned. One additional projection we can now make. This in Louisiana for president. This is a state the president was expected to carry, and we now project that he has done so. This stayed too close to call for longer than anybody expected. We also have something on that Colorado ballot initiative, which would have taken Colorado out of the category of a winner-take-all state and made it proportional allotment, and that has gone down as it was expected to. We can't tell from this board here what the result was, but it was expected to go down, and down it goes, which means that all 9 of Colorado's electoral votes will go to whoever has won that state. That remains in a category too close to call at this hour. We are going to hear at some point soon from the independent candidate, Ralph Nader, and we also expect that Barack Obama, who we projected very early on would win his race for Senate against the Republican Alan Keyes. Alan Keyes, when he accepted the nomination, was a resident of the state of Maryland and not a resident of the state of Illinois, has gone down, we project tonight. And so we're waiting to hear what Barack Obama, who is a person upon whom the Democratic Party has invested, I think it's fair to say, Juan Williams, some fairly high hopes for the future. We were kidding here earlier about whether Alan Keyes, who was something of a sacrificial lamb, I think it's fair to say, in that race, would get any votes. The last board I remember seeing as it went by had it 88-10, so that was not an unrealistic question, but he does present quite an attractive figure for the Democratic Party in Illinois.
Well, what was
Obama.
telling was the man's a state senator. It's interesting if you look back and you understand that when he was running just 2 years ago for a congressional seat, he was defeated in Chicago, and defeated by people who were involved with the civil rights movement.
Barack Obama was.
Yes,
why?
Defeated. Well, I think in terms of the solid support inside the black community in Chicago, it was seen as he was a new generation, a crossover candidate with tremendous appeal to white voters in the outer part of Illinois, but he didn't have that compelling support yet to undo the prior generation in terms of the civil rights community. But once it became a statewide race, and I must say a number of Republicans who would have been substantial candidates fell by the wayside, creating their own problems, suddenly the door opened for him. And Keyes, who was brought in, I think, by Republicans with the hope that he, because he's such a tremendous speaker, would generate excitement in the Republican community in Illinois, did exactly the opposite. I think he alienated many of his own fellow Republicans, and I think that's why you see the numbers you see there. But let me just get back to something Fred was talking about. Fred was going after the exit polls. I think the exit polls are clearly called into question here, but if you're trying to base the questioning of exit polls, Fred, on what happened in Florida last time, I think that what happened in Florida last time has to do with Ralph Nader, with Buchanan, with all the controversy that we saw last time. What we know from today is there has been no such controversy.
Well, we're going to hear from Barack Obama in a minute, but you just mentioned Ralph Nader, and we're lucky enough to have Ralph Nader available to talk to us. Ralph, where are you?
In Washington.
Well, what's your reaction to what you've seen so far tonight? It looks as if you will not be the factor in the outcome this year that you were 4 years ago. Your sense of all this?
I haven't kept up with the latest figures, but our purpose was to put the progressive agenda before the public. We wanted to do it in more states than we were able to because the Democrats spent a lot of money and a lot of lawyers filing phony lawsuits and intimidating our signature gatherers and kept us off a lot of states. But the important thing is that our panoply of future directions for the country, I think, are supported by most of the people. I think they want health insurance for all. They want a withdrawal someday from Iraq without getting into a quagmire. They want a living wage for tens of millions of workers who don't have one now. And they want more law and order on these corporate crimes, frauds, and abuse that the mass media so dutifully reports, but very little is ever done about it by either party.
Well, let me just ask you another sort of utterly political question here. Is if your totals, I mean, obviously, not being on the ballot has something, perhaps a lot to do with this, whatever the showing will be tonight. But even if we just look at polling, you know, you were a player up to through most of the 2000 election to the tune, what, 4 or 5%. I guess it didn't turn out that high. You sort of never got there this time. What do you suppose accounts for that?
It's the winner-take-all mindset of most people. They know that only one of the two Republican Democrats are going to win. The system is very rigged against competition. If nature operated that way, seeds wouldn't be allowed to sprout. So I started out, for example, at 6, 7, 5% earlier this year, and it always shrinks down because when people get closer to the election, they want to be with the winner. The problem is the two parties keep saying to us, vote for the winner, and the people keep losing. Business Week had an article this week saying that whoever wins or loses, Kerry or Bush, there's going to be one winner, and that's corporations.
You know, Ralph, I've known you for a long time, and this has been your crusade from the get-go.
Yes.
And in the early going, of course, you had some spectacular successes. It was you who brought to light the unsafety of the Chevrolet Corvair, and you cut quite a figure for a long time in Washington, and your influence seemed to be growing. Do you think your influence may have begun to wane now?
Well, most of the citizen groups are being closed out, not just ours. The two parties are increasingly responsive to what I call the permanent corporate government in Washington. If you go through every department and agency, you'll see that the overwhelming force on those departments, Department of Defense, Treasury, Interior, Agriculture, are these large corporations. And you know, anyone who wants to take a respite from soundbite journalism can visit our website, votenator.org, to see exactly the elaboration of where we think our country should be going, where it could go, and how practical it is to do that. But the political system is in a straitjacket by the corporate system. It can't respond even to the documented investigations of the business media, which has been doing quite a job talking about Wall Street crimes and abuses and Enron and WorldCom. Notice there's been no corporate reform movement proposed either by the Democrats or the Republicans, and hardly a crackdown on corporate crime.
Ralph Nader, always interesting to talk to you. Thanks very much for taking the time.
You're welcome, Brett.
Let's turn now to someone who's been campaigning most energetically for the president around the country, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Mr. Mayor, it's nice to have you. Your thoughts on the evening as you've seen it progress?
So far, it's going according to script, right? I mean, everything is falling into place the way it was predicted and the way it was last time, and we've got to see what happens in Florida and Ohio.
Now,
I'm feeling good about the president's chances, and and very encouraged by.
Well, you've been in Florida. The exit polling data in Florida was very negative for the president today. A lot of people thought that the thing was going south. It looks a little better as we see it tonight. It had begun to tighten even in the exit polling by the end of the day. You were there. You have some thoughts about Florida. What's your take on Florida?
Florida's very close. I was there, and it looked to me when I was there that the president was probably going to have maybe a 3-4 point win, and that Mel Martinez was going to win. It looked like they had a great organization. Looked like the enthusiasm was up over 4 years ago. So it seemed that it would be very, very competitive. And any poll that created some kind of big division between them has to be off.
Oh, in other words, your sense is that if there's a wide margin on either side, it's
got to be. I thought that last time. I remember last time. I think I was on NBC when they called Florida for Al Gore at 8:45 at night, and I had a sense then this is going to be a close state. So I think it's going to be close. I know the president has outperformed what he did in 2000. He's gotten 10% more of the Hispanic vote. He's going to get a majority of the Hispanic vote. I mean, there are a whole bunch of indications that indicate the president's got a good chance of winning Florida.
Let's talk about Ohio. I'm sure at some point in your travels you were there as well. You have any feel for that state?
I was in Ohio so often I may have to file for residency.
Right.
Ohio, I think, is also going to be very close. And the president's got a great organization there. It's a 1, 2, 3 point state, one way or the other, and I think the president's got the better chance of winning it. So, I mean, this is going to go a long, long time, and it's going to take a while, and I think ultimately the president's going to win. Of course, I want him to win also because I tremendously respect the man's leadership.
Are you telling us, Mr. Mayor, that when we go home tonight, whenever we go, that we won't know?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I've been so involved in this. I'm hardly the best one to analyze all of this, except to tell you that there's just tremendous enthusiasm out there for the president. I think it's going to reflect itself in some of these states.
Well, Mr. Mayor, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Britt. Get some coffee.
I'll try. Thank you, sir. All the best to you. Thank you very much. So we're going to take a brief break. When we come back, we'll keep an eye out for the victory statement of Barack Obama, a rising star in the Democratic Party. Stay with us. As we await the arrival of 10 o'clock and the wave of poll closings that will bring, including the two states you just saw on your screen there, let's check in with Greta Van Susteren, who's keeping an eye on ballot initiatives, and specifically those that involve gay marriage. Greta?
Yeah, it's a huge issue, Britt. It's on 11 ballots, and we have 3 more states to call. The state of Arkansas, defining the marriage between a man and a woman, and yes, 72%, no, 28%. That's Arkansas. In the state of Michigan, we are projecting that yes, 65%, no, 35%. In the state of North Dakota, projecting 79% yes and no is 21%. And I have a panel here, and let me just discuss with a second my panel. Judge Napolitano, why is this so important? Why are we seeing this on so many ballots this year?
Well, I think we're seeing it on ballots because the Republicans believed that the attitude in the country was against gay marriage, which is President Bush's view, and it might bring out more Republican voters. I think it's very interesting that these states are amending their constitution to prohibit gay marriages. That means that a couple legally married in Massachusetts moving to a state that prohibits it has no hope of having their marriage recognized there unless the U.S. Supreme Court steps in and invalidates the ballot initiatives that you just talked about. Unlikely to happen, in my opinion.
And for instance, even Ken Gross is also here, the state of Georgia, which of course has said that they want to amend their constitution to define marriages between a man and woman. They already had a law on the book, but they wanted to put it on their constitution. Why?
Well, they wanted to make it firm so it wouldn't be subject to legal challenges and judges altering it as a statutory interpretation. It goes in the Constitution, the state, you really can't get at it legally.
All right, all these ballot measures that we're talking about, we say it's defining marriage between a man and woman, but they're not all identical. And in fact, in the state of Ohio, it also, the vote, which was in favor of defining marriages between a man and woman, Judge Napolitano went a little bit further. In Ohio, it says something more.
It did. In Ohio, the Constitution, as amended, now bans civil unions, which even President Bush said 2 weeks ago he was in favor of. This is the only state so far to amend its Constitution to ban any kind of recognition of a gay union.
Is this, are we seeing something new? I mean, we're seeing so many ballot measures and on these social issues like this. Is this something new? Is this a new phenomenon?
Yeah, we haven't seen it in this degree before, and I think part of it goes back to what the judge said. Is it there to bring out a certain element to the vote, a certain conservative, social conservative on the ballot to help candidates who might be in favor of that?
You mean driving the voters to the poll because they're so interested in this issue?
That's right. They're issues of passion that bring people out to vote.
All right. Now, the Democrats have done the same thing, putting important issues as well that they want on these ballots, right?
Sure. And you get the opposite reaction. If you put something like that on the ballot that brings conservatives, you use it to get the liberals and the others who don't favor it to the ballot as well.
All right. Another huge controversial issue in this country, embryonic stem cell research. We're waiting to hear what California is going to do, but it's on California's ballot, isn't it?
It's on California's ballot, Greta. It's very popular. All the major office holders in California are in favor of it. Even California, which has budget problems, now willing to sell bonds to raise $3 billion with a B dollars to create the largest and richest research center for stem cell research anywhere on the planet at taxpayer expense.
All right, that's huge. We're waiting for California to decide that one. Embryonic stem research, we don't have the answer on that one, but we'll be following it. Back to you, Brett.
All right, Greta, thanks very, very much. We're waiting. What apparently is going to be, we're going to have some footage to show you of the Bush family watching the returns, and as soon as we have that, we'll bring it to you and see if anything is said on the tape. That could be interesting. And in the meantime, we're just kind of keeping an eye out here, waiting. Well, we just have a call to make. This is an important one because this will be a switch. In South Carolina, Fox News now projects that Jim DeMint, the Republican congressman, will defeat Inez Tenenbaum, the former state education official down there. I guess she's still the state education superintendent down there. She's a very attractive candidate who gave DeMint, in what is a pretty intensely Republican state, a run for his money. We now project Jim DeMint the winner in South Carolina. That is a pickup of one. I guess that's a net pickup now for the Republicans of one seat so far. Democrats would need a net pickup on the night overall, a long way to go yet, of 2 in order to take control of the Senate back. So that would mean they'd need to do even better in the remaining races than we.
Well, they only
and
need
a couple of the
they would only need one if Kerry won the presidency, and then John Edwards would make the tie.
Right. But a couple of the seats they were looking at, one was Oklahoma, where earlier they had great hopes that Brad Carson could take that state in a very that Senate seat in a very Republican state. He didn't take it, so Republicans protected that. And the other one is Jim Bunning, who has inched ahead in his effort to win re-election in Kentucky.
Inched ahead in the raw vote as well as
in the raw vote, yes. And if he holds on there, that's another vulnerable Republican state that Democrats didn't win and reduces their chances of taking the Senate, I think, substantially.
All right, so we await the victory speech of Barack Obama. Now we have added to that victors. We'll wait to hear what Jim DeMint has to say about it.
You know what, I'm struck by just watching our raw vote totals there on the screen, which are interesting. Bush is running ahead of Republican candidates in a couple of key states. He seems to be running consistently 2 or 3 percentage points ahead of Mel Martinez, the Republican Senate candidate in Florida. Since both Bush and Martinez were even with their opponents, Bush Kerry was kind of looked even. Martinez Castro looked even. I think that's interesting. In Missouri, the governor's race there looks dead even right now on the raw vote. Bush is ahead a little bit in the popular vote. I wonder if Bush is outperforming sort of the normal Republican vote in a couple of these key states, and he may be doing just enough to hold at least some of these states in the column. He needs them all. He needs to hold. He needs to hold everything.
That phenomenon is also true in South Carolina, where he's running ahead of Jim DeMint.
Right. There's another factor in Virginia, which we've been looking at. So far, there's 66% of the vote in, and Bush has got 56% of the vote, which is higher than he carried in 2000, and substantially higher than the exit poll showed. 4 points higher than it showed.
Well, the exit poll continues to be the target for this hour. We'll check back on that question. We'll also check in with Chris Wallace on the other side of a break, but we've got to take a break. Stay tuned.
You just.
As we promised you earlier, there's some sound and picture of the Bush family watching the returns at the White House. Let's take a look at it.
Barney, do you got something to say? Barney. Don't let him come any closer. Come here. Barney.
Oh, Barney. Come on, Barney.
How's it going, We're very upbeat, thank you. We're going to get a winner tonight? I believe I will win. Thank you very much. I feel good about it. I'm glad to be able to watch the returns here with my family and friends, and it's going to be an exciting evening. All right, thank you all. Thank you all very much. I think we will, yeah.
Well, at a brief tableau, it appeared that while they might have been watching the election returns, that most of the attention at the moment that the camera crew was in there was going to Barney. Barney, of course, one of the presidential dogs. And you heard the president say, of course, that he was very upbeat and he believed he would win. You saw, of course, that former President and Mrs. Bush were there. And then the man in the foreground left, who might not have been too familiar to you, was President Bush's brother, Marvin, who is not in politics, unlike his brother Jeb, who is doubtless waiting the election returns down in Florida. Let's check in now with Chris Wallace for further insights that he may be able to give us from the exit polling. Chris?
Well, Britt, these states that we can't call are stacking up like cordwood, but we can tell you a little bit about one of the states, and at least what is on voters' minds. That's the state of Colorado, a very red state in the past, but also the birthplace of John Kerry. And right now, like a lot of other states, too close to call. How do Coloradans rate their economy? 54% view it positively, 46% have a negative view. Voters there say they're worried about their jobs. Almost half, 45%, say the job situation is worse today than 4 years ago. Of those voters, 78% voted for Kerry, 20% for the president. And this is spilling over into that very important Senate race in Colorado between Democratic Attorney General Ken Salazar and Republican beer magnate Pete Coors. Those who say the job situation is worse voted overwhelmingly for Democrat Salazar, 79% to 20% for Coors. But Colorado is also the home of James Dobson's Focus on the Family, an influential evangelical Christian group. 20% of evangelical Christians there say they voted for Salazar, but 79% voted for the Republican Pete Coors. And those same Christians supported President Bush, 85% to 14%. One interesting footnote to the voting in Colorado, 11% of Bush supporters are supporting Democrat Ken Salazar for the U.S. Senate. So, Britt, there does seem to be some ticket splitting going on in that state.
Chris, thanks a lot. Let's check in now with Michael Barone, who is down at our decision desk for what he can tell us about, well, about Florida, the state that has got us all fascinated right now.
Well, Brett, we've been getting more election returns in from Florida, and I'm just trying to compare the margins that the two candidates got in some of the bigger counties that have reported all or almost all of their precincts in at the present time. Among the Democratic counties, we've got Alachua, the home of Gainesville University of Florida. That's got a 14,600 Democratic majority. It was 13,241. That's a little bit of a gain. Broward County, that's the county that includes Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, Pompano Beach, and so forth, a large Jewish population. It's showing 100, and that was 68% for Al Gore 4 years ago. 100, with 87% of the precincts in, they've got 185,000 vote margin. That's a little below the 209,000 vote margin. If you extrapolate and the margin is the same in the rest of the precincts, it would be about 214,000, slightly more. Leon County, an increase for the Democrats from 22,000 majority 4 years ago to 28,000. But there's some increases on the Republican side, too. Brevard County on the Space Coast, that was a 17,000 vote margin. Now it's just one vote under 30,000. Clay County, Mayport Naval Air Station near Naval Base near Miami, near Jacksonville, that was gone up from 27,000 to 32,000 Republican margin. Duval County, the city that coterminous with the city of Jacksonville, up from 44,000 Republican to 55,000 Republican. Indian River, a county dear to Fred Barnes, who owns a house there in Vero Beach, that's up from 8,000 to 12,000 Republican margin. And so it goes with these various counties. Orange County, 3,960 vote margin. It went for Al Gore 4 years ago after having voted for Bob Dole against Bill Clinton. So George W. Bush seems to have put it back in the Republican column.
Hey, Michael, interesting stuff. All of this, of course, is under the heading of one of the running stories tonight, which is exit poll on trial. All right, we're coming up in just a couple of minutes here on the 10 o'clock hour. There's a bunch of poll closings and a bunch of states we'll be able to walk you through. We're going to be able to call a couple of races on the presidential side and a couple on the Senate side. So stay with us, everybody. And in the meantime, let's review this as best we can. So far, not a single state in the presidential column has changed. Not a red state has gone blue, not a blue state has gone red, correct? And we're now, what, polls started closing 3 hours ago almost. And nothing has changed hands. And the president holds, therefore, a lead in the electoral votes of 171 to 112, which looks like a big, comfortable lead. We are able to add one more state to the president's column. No surprise here, but we're now able to project, as we knew we ultimately would, Mississippi for President Bush. The only question was why it took so long. As you can see, Mississippi hasn't been exactly lightning fast. Precincts only 21% in as we make that projection for President Bush, which adds a bit to his, or has maybe I've already added to his electoral total. I can't be sure. Looking at that, that's only a handful of electoral votes in that state anyway. But as we come up on the 10 o'clock hour, we'll have Iowa, we'll have Nevada, and we'll be able to tell you something at least about the state of play in those states. Utah as well, and Montana, the polls will close. So we're beginning to get the Mountain West in, at least in terms of the polls closing. Obviously, some of the votes in those states are counted immediately. Some of them already counted, so sometimes you can get some raw vote totals. Sometimes you have to operate simply off of exit polls. I'm not promising any great surprises, but you're going to want to stick around for these 10 o'clock results.
You know, Mike Barone mentioned all these counties in Florida where Bush is doing better. Indian River County, which is Vero Beach, where I do have a house and my mother lives, and sister and so on all live there. It is vindication of the Bush strategy to go into Republican areas and build up the Republican vote, to register more people there, to register newcomers there. And you see in all these counties where Florida is a state, of course, where many transients have moved in, and Indian River is one of them, where the vote went up about 50%, Bush's margin of winning there. Whether that'll be enough to win the election, I don't know, but it looks like it's going to really give him a solid chance of winning Florida at any rate. And
that information we just saw on the screen indicates, as you pointed out earlier, that the president, while he's up by 5 percentage points with, 77% of the precincts counted, obviously where they all are and what's not in yet will tell you a lot about whether that's as meaningful or 5% is a realistic outcome. It's definitely better than Mel Martinez, the Republican Senate candidate, is doing. So we will certainly keep a close eye there as the night wears on. It's 10 o'clock. Polls have closed in several other states now. In Iowa, the polls are closed. Too close to call. No surprise that it's too close to call. Nevada, that's a state supposed to be a Bush state. That's too close to call. Utah, there was never much doubt about Utah being a Bush state. It is. But Montana remains at this hour not able to be called. In Senate races, Nevada, we project Harry Reid, the winner. No surprise there. He's the deputy Democratic leader in the Senate. He was expected to win. He has done so. We project that Senator Chuck Grassley is a winner, although there's no check mark by his name. We do project him a winner, as we also project Senator Robert Bennett a winner in Utah. So Florida for president, we're just going down the list here, too close. Pennsylvania for president, we have projected that for Senator Kerry, although there's no check mark there on the screen. New Hampshire, we have projected for, I believe we projected, have we not projected that? Yeah, no, that's still out there, too close to call. Missouri, still too close to call. President up there, expected to win, only up a little bit, though. 19% in, and that may be what's holding that up. Michigan, the president ahead, that's a Gore state. That's way too close to call. You can see there are only 5% of the precincts yet reporting, so that's a little slow on the uptake on getting the raw vote to us to analyze. So we are seeing that as too close to call. Minnesota, still too close to call. That's a blue state, a Gore state that Senator Kerry will want very much to win. Had been expected to. Wisconsin, 9% in only. President up, but that's early returns. Too close. Colorado, same deal, 6% there. Too close. That's a red state. New Mexico, this was a Gore state where the president had thought he had a chance. Tiny amount in. Too close to call. Arizona, this is a Bush state, expected to win. Kerry hadn't campaigned there in forever, if he ever did, but it's too close. Now, in New Mexico, this is not a surprise, but we do have a winner in the governor's race we can project. This is Bill Richardson, the very popular former energy secretary, former congressman. We have projected him the winner, and there he is. Bill Richardson with a Fox microphone in hand. Well, Governor, what do you make of all this?
Well, I think here in New Mexico, Britt, it's going to go down to the wire. I predict that Senator Kerry will win by about 1% because of a huge turnout of Hispanic and Indian voters that we registered in the last few months. I believe it's going to be very, very tight. President Bush is popular here. He was governor of a neighboring state. He's campaigned here a lot. There's a conservative area in the state that he has a strong base, but in in my view, the Hispanic vote, the Get Out the Vote efforts, newly registered voters, and about 10,000 new Navajo voters, the largest tribe in America, that in the past has not participated much, participating heavily. We have heavy turnout reports from Indian precincts that we will carry it, but it'll go down to the wire.
So what's your take as you watch these other returns from other states coming in? You're a man with a national consciousness about these races. I believe I, by the way, called you a winner tonight. Obviously, you're not on the ballot tonight, so you're an incumbent, correct?
That's right, but thank you for saying that I'm the winner.
And always, Governor, a winner in our eyes. But I did want to get your thoughts about, well, a couple things. One is, New Mexico, you think we could go very late, maybe into tomorrow on New Mexico?
No, I think it'll be, with the polls have been closed only an hour. There's still a lot of voters out there, a huge turnout. I think we will know sometime tonight. It'll be very narrow. There haven't been that many contested issues, challenges, a few breakdowns of one or two machines. So I am confident we'll be able to call a winner tonight.
Okay, well, what about the rest of the country from what you can tell? I mean, do you think from what you're hearing that we're going to be, a couple of days away here? Florida being what it is and all that you've heard?
Well, I think that it'll be a late evening, but I do see Senator Kerry, especially in those Midwest states, in Pennsylvania, I think in Ohio, Florida, 2 out of 3 we need. I think if you look at some of the other blue states that Gore had, I don't see significant erosion. I'm a little surprised about New Hampshire. I think that Senator Kerry will win it. But on the whole, I think we should be very pleased as Americans. This is the highest turnout ever that America's had. Secondly, a lot of new voters coming to the polls, especially young people. And I think both candidates delivered their messages well. It was a hearty campaign that hopefully will bring more Americans into the political process. But I do think Senator Kerry will be the winner eventually, and it'll be happening tonight.
All right.
Late.
Governor Bill Richardson, always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for taking the time with us. And keep that Fox flag on the microphone and with the other interviews you do, won't you? Thank you.
Right.
Okay, Governor, thank you very much. All right, let's just review what we have here. We haven't called a single state the other way for anybody. In other words, we haven't called a single Gore state for President Bush, nor have we called a single Bush state for Senator Kerry. So we remain locked in this status quo situation, even now, more than 3 hours after polls started closing. I noticed in that list of states we had too close to call, we mentioned Pennsylvania. I had thought that we had called Pennsylvania earlier in the evening. Am I wrong about that?
I didn't hear it called, but I mean,
I didn't either.
I think
we did not. Then if I ever said that, folks, I stand corrected and I apologize. I had thought that, and I think that was one of the states where the exit poll gap was such that I must have imagined, perhaps, that. Let's take a look at it now. Kerry way ahead, 37% in. That's not a lot of votes. So those precincts must be in some less populated areas, perhaps, which would not bode particularly well for the president, because places like Philadelphia are expected to go heavily for Senator Kerry. But Western Pennsylvania, on the other hand, where Senator Rick Santorum has been so active in trying to get new voters registered on the Republican side and organized for the Republicans, and which has been kind of his political base, as he has turned out to be a surprisingly successful politician, perhaps. We also haven't been able to make a call, I believe, in that Pennsylvania Senate race where Arlen Specter, the moderate incumbent, we haven't been able to call that either. That's kind of interesting. But Pennsylvania was one of those that we thought would go early for Kerry if the exit polling were right.
Well, it
maybe
really
this slow vote coming in, but who knows?
It really is worth recounting what was buzzing around the country during the afternoon and how wide a margin it was. I mean, in Pennsylvania, the exit polls indicated that Kerry was going to win by 58 to 42, which is a fantastic margin.
Well, it's a fantastic margin when you consider how close the pre-election polls had been in that state.
Right. 4 years ago, Gore carried the state with 52% of the vote. This was going to be 58% according to the exit polls, which would have been an incredible increase. And under those circumstances, it looked as though Senator Specter might be in some kind of trouble. But again, we don't know, whether these exit polls are going to pan out. And this is true in state after state. I mean, the results were, the exit poll said 52-47 in Ohio, 52-48 in Florida, 53-47 in Wisconsin, 54-48 in Iowa, 50-48. Yeah, and 57-42 in Minnesota. I mean, it looked as though this was going to be some sort of a sweep, and we don't see that yet. These are all too close to call.
What we do see is everybody calling into question Michael Barone, Ken Mehlman, the Bush campaign chair, everybody calling into question what's going on in the state of Florida, which, of course, is getting back to Britt's point. The necessary calculus for Senator Kerry is to take some of these previously red states away from President Bush. We don't hear so much argument at the moment about what the exit polls had said in the state of Ohio. But let's say that Florida stays with President Bush. Let's say then that Pennsylvania and Ohio go then and switch. That then throws the contest back to what we saw really this weekend, which is those upper Midwestern states. We just saw Iowa close at 10 p.m. We see Montana, Nevada. Nevada was another one that people thought might be in play. New Mexico.
Yeah, but not lately.
But
New Mexico is in play.
New Mexico is definitely in play, and that is, therefore, that's
Iowa,
where the race...
New Mexico, Wisconsin.
Correct.
Those constitute a possible path to victory to a Republican losing Ohio, to the president losing Ohio.
And Michigan. You'd have to throw Michigan in there.
No, you wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't.
I think Michigan would add.
No. Ohio is 20 electoral votes. Wisconsin 10, Iowa 7, New Mexico 5. So that's 22. That would offset Ohio, but those are three very dicey states for the president to win. That are
well, it's hard. It's kind of a little hard to picture him winning in Wisconsin and Iowa. And New Mexico having lost Ohio.
Indeed.
Although, let's not forget, the economic situation in Ohio is notably worse than it is in those other states.
And there are always surprises. We shouldn't be slaves to the last 2000. The states moved 5%. Kerry could win Pennsylvania with 55% of the vote. For one thing, remember this Nader numbers. When Gore got 52% in Pennsylvania, Nader probably got, I haven't looked it up, got 3%. So you could make it, and if he upped it a couple of percent, we shouldn't, the exit polls seem to be systematically maybe plus 2% Kerry. I'm guessing now, looking at the number of states we now have something close to final data on. It's still tougher. I mean, on the raw data in today, you'd prefer to be in Kerry's shoes than Bush's, I do think. But if Bush can pull Florida out, we then get into Ohio, as we've been saying. Ohio really becomes crucial. It's very hard to really drawing an inside straight if you're Bush. If you lose Ohio, I think he has to hold Florida and Ohio.
Well, we got nothing on. We don't have anything on either one of them yet that we can.
No, it's deja vu. It's deja vu all over again.
But one thing we do have, and we're glad of it, is Martha McCallum to update us on some other races. Martha.
All right, Britt. Thanks very much. As we said at the beginning of the evening, 9 Senate races, key Senate races, up for grabs tonight. We're going to take you through 7 of them right now, and let's start off with Kentucky, which has been very interesting tonight. But you can see right now Jim Bunning, the incumbent there, former baseball player, been in Washington quite a long time in the Senate since 1998 and in Congress before that. He's at 51%. That is 99% of those precincts reporting in Kentucky. So it looks like Dan Mangiardo may be losing the edge that he had earlier in the night. North Carolina Senate race, Erskine Bowles, the former chief of staff for President Clinton, putting up a tough race against Richard Burr here, Congressman. 39% of the vote is in North Carolina, and that is, of course, John Edwards' Senate seat that is up for grabs there. And let's take a look at Florida. Very tight race, 49-49 right now, with 78% of the precincts in. So we know that the presidential race is too tight to call in Florida, and we're not getting any real clue here from the way things are shaping up in the Senate race either, which looks to be very tight between Betty Castor and Mel Martinez, who is a housing secretary for President Bush. This is another one that is a bit of a shocker, at least at this point, with 40% of the precincts reporting. Arlen Specter, longtime Pennsylvania senator, getting a good run for his money from Joe Huffel, who is the Democratic congressional candidate there, 51%, with 40% of those precincts in, much closer than expected for Pennsylvania. South Dakota, really the granddaddy of all the Senate races tonight. Of course, the Senate Minority Leader Tom Daschle 51% in South Dakota right now. John Thune had been leading earlier in this rate, but we only have 21% of these precincts in, and the Native American vote is said to be very significant, very important, I should say, in the outcome of this race. In fact, Tom Daschle launching a lawsuit against John Thune with regard to how the efforts that they've made to bring in those Native American votes. So a very interesting battle going on in South Dakota that we're going to continue to follow very closely this evening. This one also very close. Colorado, not yet called in the presidential race. Ken Salazar is the Democrat putting up a good fight here against Pete Coors, who is, of course, the beer magnate. This is Ben Nighthorse Campbell's seat. It should be pointed out that he's a Republican, but he used to be a Democrat. So this is a seat that Democrats would love to get back on their side. Right now, too close to call. And as you can see, only 7% of those precincts are in so far tonight for Colorado. Let's take a look at Louisiana. This is a three-way race. The winner of this race, in order to claim this seat, has to get at least 50%. David Vitter has had a very strong race so far as a Republican. Louisiana has never had a Republican senator, but if he doesn't get 50%, there'll be a runoff on December the 4th between Chris John and John Kennedy and David Vitter until one of them gets a 50% of that race. So that's a quick wrap-up of some of the more interesting races going on, some interesting shakeups look to be in the works, and we'll keep you posted on all of them. Brett, back to you.
Martha, thank you. We're now able to put another couple of states into the win column for the president. This is Missouri. We now project will go for the president with its 11 electoral votes. That was a state he's expected to win. Also Arkansas, where there'd been some last-minute feeling among Democrats that with a little Bill Clinton magic that they might be able to turn that state in his direction. Its 5 electoral votes are now in the president's column. That brings him to 193. He'd been at 177. I kind of wonder how he ever got to 100, and I thought he had anyway, how he got to 193, because 177 and 17 makes 194, but that maybe we can blame that on the exit poll. Anyway, we're waiting for Barack Obama, the winner in that Illinois Senate race. This is Mrs. Obama, who is no doubt in the process of introducing him. I would go to her. I'm sure she's interesting, but sometimes these introductions can go on for quite a long time. But we can listen into a little of it anyway. Let's listen.
Right, and no one is more proud than me, right? Because what everybody has learned over the course of this campaign about my husband is what I've known for a very, very long time, that this man is so special. You know, he is an incredibly special man, and the one question that I got time and time again was, Michelle, is this man the real thing? I mean, is he for real? You know, and of course, to his embarrassment, I told you his flaws, right? I told you about the socks and the dirty clothes and not putting up the butter, right? But I told you that because I love him, and what we know is that he's not perfect, but he's really close to perfect, right? This man who I am so proud of just leads a life of principle, of integrity. He's done this throughout my knowing him, and he has never let me down. He is a man who honors and loves his family. He's a man who was raised on principles, basic Midwestern values, that your word is your bond, right? That you finish what you start, that you work hard for everything that you get in this life, that you respect everyone and treat them with dignity, even if you don't see eye to eye, right? That's who this man is, right? He is a very special man. So I am honored and privileged to present him to you this evening. I am honored to present to you a man who will guide the state with pride, with dignity, with integrity, with truth. And one thing you can be sure of is that he's going to work every single day to make sure that he's doing the best to improve the lives of the people in the state of Illinois. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce to you the next United States Senator from the state of Illinois, my husband, my honey, my man, my baby's daddy, Barack Obama.
Lose audio here?
Yay!
Thank you, Illinois. I don't know about you, but I'm still fired up. I am fired up. Look at this crowd. Thank you, Illinois. Let me begin by thanking all the people who have been involved in this effort, from downstate to upstate, city, suburb, from every community throughout the state. Let me say how grateful I am to all of you for the extraordinary privilege of standing here this evening. Let me thank, because I will forget later on, it's a thankless task, let me thank right now the best political staff that there has been put together in this state. They are wonderful. You know who you are. You guys have been outstanding. I appreciate all of you. Let me thank my pastor, Jeremiah A. Wright, Jr., of Trinity United Church of Christ, fellow Trinitarians out there. Let me thank all the elected officials who stood by me through thick and through thin. But most of all, let me thank my family. I am so grateful to my nephew Avery, my niece Leslie, my mother-in-law Marion, my brother-in-law Craig Robinson, his wonderful girlfriend Kelly, my sister Maya, my new niece Suhaila right there, my brother-in-law Conrad, and most of all, my two precious daughters, Malia Obama and Sasha Obama.
Well, Barack Obama, as you can see there, is enjoying and relishing his moment after an extended introduction by his wife, Michelle. And we're going to take a brief break. But when we come back, we've got a very interesting situation in Kentucky where it appears 100% of the vote is in. The Republican incumbent has claimed victory. We are not prepared to project him a winner, and we're going to find out why in a moment. Stay tuned. We got an intriguing situation in Kentucky. This is a state where a Democratic upset seemed very possible indeed, because the Republican incumbent, the former baseball great pitcher Jim Bunning, had made some misstatements that got him in trouble, and all the precincts are in now. Bunning is ahead by 8,000 votes there. 18,000 votes, excuse me. And we're not prepared to say he's winning, and Michael Barone is with our decision desk to explain why.
Well, Brett, I've talked it over with the decision desk, and basically we're proceeding with caution here. We've got an 18,000 vote margin for Jim Bunning. The last I've heard, there were 4 precincts left off, 3 in Jefferson County, which includes the city of Louisville, and 1 in Daviess County, which includes the much smaller manufacturing town of Owensboro on the Ohio River. We don't really expect those to overturn it, but sometimes, Britt, a mistake is made in tabulation by the state or local officials. That happened in 2002. We called a race for Don Siegelman, the incumbent Democratic governor of Alabama, who was ahead by a tabulated 9,000 votes. And it turned out the votes, I believe it was in Baldwin County, which is the Gulf Coast county just east of Mobile, were mistabulated. There was an error in the addition column or something by a state official, and it turned out that Mr. Siegelman was not reelected and Republican Bob Riley was elected again. So the note here is of caution to make sure that something like this kind of glitch doesn't come up. Better to be safe than to be sorry.
Understand it very well, Michael. Thank you very much. I think it is worth noting, however, that with an 18,000 vote margin and 100% of the precincts reporting, I guess 100% it must be a rounding error, because as Michael pointed out, there's still a few places that are uncounted, or at least untabulated, perhaps. that Bunning has claimed victory, and so we'll see. We're going to take a look now at the list of presidential states where the polls are closed, but we're not ready to call. Florida, perhaps the foremost one of all. 83% in, not ready to call it. Not ready to call Pennsylvania either. Kerry appears way ahead in what's in with half the votes in. A lot to go there. New Hampshire, similar situation as well. Only 9% in Michigan. Those numbers really, they look big, but for a state like that, they're kind of meaningless. Similarly, Minnesota, Kerry ahead, too close to call. Wisconsin, same deal. Colorado, too close. New Mexico, not able to call that. Not able to call Arizona. You heard Bill Richardson on New Mexico earlier saying he thought in the end it would go late, but that Kerry would win it. That Iowa, 4% reporting. That's not enough. Nevada, we got very little out of Nevada at the moment, as you can see. Not much out of Montana either. And this is some picture that comes from our forces in Fallujah. And in a moment, after we get finished with a view of the feet and the cables of what appear to be the technicians, we may be able to get a sense of what they're watching over there. And as you can see, folks, as I hope you'll be able to see, that appears to be the Fox News channel, and the troops are getting a dose of Mort Kondracki, it appears. No, that's my tie. I'm afraid that's me. Yeah, you see those guys dozing off in the front row, it must be me. So there we are. Okay, troops in Fallujah watching the election returns on the Fox News channel. Okay, panel.
At about, what, 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. in Iraq,
I guess it's pretty late, yeah. It's pretty late
well, I guess they're soldiers. They're not on a 9-to-5 day.
Right.
Well, this prudence is driving me crazy. You think we'd know more by this time, and that Florida and Ohio are the crucial states here, and they're still hanging out there. We'll know something about this election when we get some final results from the two of them.
I said on Sunday, I think on Fox News Sunday, sitting right here, that I wasn't sure who was going to win. I thought Bush was going to win comfortably, but I promised everyone they could go. We would call it by 11:30 at night and would have a good night's sleep. I think this is one of many predictions I've made that will turn out to be entirely false. It is deja vu. It is deja vu all over again here. I can't believe it.
You also predicted, I think, that Bush was going to get 324 electoral votes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it looks
now
like
you see why when they do the predictions on Fox News Sunday, I don't play.
Yeah.
Juan, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, I think this is going to be very close. I mean, the problem with caution and everybody reacting to what happened in 2000, fighting the last war all over again, is that I think people are reluctant to make these calls. The question about the exit polls, though, has become the story of the night, and you just have to wonder what's going on there. The people who run the exit polls aren't coming forward to say they've made mistakes, but the Bush people...
wait, let's be fair.
When
an exit poll is 52-47, that means the state can't be called.
Right.
It's not their fault if every stupid journalist who's never been in a campaign and never done real polling in his life goes out and says 52-47, it's a landslide, and calls all his buddies and says the race is over.
Remember,
that's what it means with a margin of error. 52-47 is an uncallable race.
Right, and even remember, we got a nationwide sample of 12,000 people in an exit poll. But the state-by-state samples are obviously much smaller, right. And so you're ending up with margins of error which are significant enough to where if you got the president ahead by 51-48 or 49, or Kerry ahead 51-49, even if it's uniform across a bunch of states, it could easily be wrong in every one of them, or at least in half of them.
And we're now, but having said that, they seem to be a little bit off in some states.
Okay, everybody.
But we're going to have to wait for real vote now.
Our colleagues downstairs have taken some further soundings and conferred, and we are now prepared to project that with 100% of the precincts reporting that incumbent Republican Senator Jim Bunning has won re-election. Now, that is something that if this were 3 months ago, this is a race we wouldn't have thought we'd be paying much attention to tonight, because Bunning was in no trouble, it seemed. Jim Bunning is a man of strong views, and he has been known from time to time to express them in strong terms, and he did so. And the next thing you know, his challenger Dan Monjardo was challenging him seriously. He got into trouble. It's almost 10:30. We got to take a break. Be right back. Just to close the loop a bit on that race that we were finally able to call in Kentucky, Jim Bunning, the incumbent Republican senator, able to win re-election there by a narrow margin over his challenger, Dan Monjardo. The reason that's important is that that became one of the Republican seats that Democrats thought they had a serious chance of picking up, which would have increased their somewhat uphill chances of taking over the U.S. Senate. So you can take that along with Oklahoma, another place where they had high hopes, off the table, it seems, for tonight. The odds against a Democratic pickup or gaining control of the U.S. Senate have now diminished noticeably. That is the one story tonight that we can, I think, so far be sure of. Let's check in for more on tonight and reaction from the Republican side of the ledger from our chief White House correspondent, Jim Angle, who is at Bush headquarters. Jim?
Brett, the Bush people are quite a bit heartened by a shift, at least in where we thought the race was headed over the last few hours. Initially, of course, exit polls did not look very good for them. They wouldn't say much at the time. I asked someone a few moments ago how they felt, how they really felt back then, now that things seem to be going more their way. And one of the strategists said, I bought a box of Kleenex, but I didn't open them. So they are now feeling quite a bit better about this, because a number of races where the projections had President Bush losing are now looking even or better. In Florida, for instance, they say that they are doing better in every county in Florida, including Democratic ones, than they did in 2000. In Ohio, in Franklin County, around Columbus, they lost that by 1 point in 2000. They're now winning it by 2 or 3. So they see lots of good signs, and if they win Florida and Ohio, they say, it will be very difficult for the Kerry campaign to then put together a winning number. They would have to go back and take some states away from Bush that he had been winning. That is still possible, of course, but as they look at the new projections now, they are much more heartened than they were earlier in the evening when, as I say, they were a little gloomy, but tried not to show it. Now they're beginning to see how they could pull off a victory here, and looking very closely at a win in Florida, followed by one in Ohio, which would put them in pretty good shape for a win.
Well, let me ask you, Jim, when you say they're looking at these numbers and projections, they're looking at raw vote much as we are, correct?
They're looking at raw vote. They're also looking at the exit polls, which shifted late in the day with some new data, and some states that had had the President Bush down then shifted to even. They're looking at Wisconsin, Michigan, New Mexico, states like that where things had not looked that good earlier in the evening and now look even, with some of the key districts that they look at trending toward the president. So they are much more heartened and now see actually that the numbers, they say, are what they originally projected, not what the exit polls originally projected. They say all of those exaggerated the Democratic vote. That if you look at all of the early exit polls, the Democratic vote was exaggerated. As you look at the actual results now, they have done far better, even in the states where they lost, losing by 3 or 4 points instead of 10, 12, 15, 17. So they say their numbers actually turned out to be far more accurate than the exit polls, and they're feeling a lot better about their initial projections, which they were beginning to wonder about. Britt?
Well, Jim, thanks very much. We'll see how all of that plays out, of course, as the night wears on. As we've noted here, things may be looking better for one candidate or another, but nobody has taken a state away from anybody yet tonight. And we're still waiting for that to happen 3 hours and, 36 minutes and 22 seconds after the polls began closing. So we continue to look ahead here. Let's check in Boston with our chief political correspondent, Carl Cameron, who is with what was, and probably still is, a very upbeat set of Kerry people. Carl?
Oh, absolutely, Brett. The Kerry campaign would very much like to continue talking about the exit polls. They think that that's the way to go for them, and they hope that actually is realized in the actual ballot booths this evening. Number of things. First of all, the states that Kerry was defending in the last couple of days. Joe Lockhart, the Kerry campaign senior advisor, has said now that they believe that in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, 3 states, blue states, that Al Gore won 4 years ago, that had shown very, very close polls. The average was within a couple of points, well within the margin of error in all of them. They believe that they will now hold those states. And that gives them really the opportunity to begin looking offensively at Ohio and Florida. And about Ohio specifically, the Kerry campaign is suggesting that they are now working at 115% of their expectations for the African-American vote, and suggesting that President Bush is coming in at 94% of the Kerry campaign's expectations for the Republican vote. Of course, the expectations that the Kerry campaign put together are theirs, and the historical models would be better, but they're arguing that amongst African-American voters now they are doing better than they had anticipated, and it could create for them a significant boost. They also say that in Columbus, Ohio, where the lines are hours long, it's possible that the polls could stay open to midnight this evening, just for those people who have been waiting even after the polls close. So a great deal of speculation on the Kerry campaign's behalf that perhaps this isn't going to be the quick and decisive victory that they were hoping for in their rhetoric just a couple of hours ago, Brett.
Carl, very interesting. Please keep us updated on the thinking there. We heard some specifics, as we've gotten from you, some specifics from the Bush side about why they claim to be feeling better than they did a few hours ago. Of course, the grief they felt a few hours ago, they weren't admitting, so I suppose you always admit your elation and deny your grief. So far, we haven't gotten much in any final result for grief or elation by anybody, with the possible exception of Jim Bunning, who probably feels tonight that he has dodged a bullet that seemed almost surely headed his way a day or two ago. So, Carl, thank you. Jim Angle, thank you as well. We'll be back with both of you. In the meantime, we're trying to delve a little bit into what we're getting, what hard data we're getting out of Ohio. And we go back to Michael Barone, who knows the state well and knows what's coming out of there. Michael, what do you have for us?
Well, Britt, out of Ohio's 88 counties, we've got 9 here who have now reported on the state, on the website or on the Associated Press wire, that complete 100% of precincts. And what we find in those counties, the biggest one of those is Lake County. That's northeast of Cleveland. It's a suburban county, includes Mentor, Painesville, and Willoughby and Wickliffe. I've done voter interviewing there. It's a mixture of working class areas and affluent suburbs. And what we see there, turnout in Lake County up 16%. The Bush percentage slightly increased from 50.5 to 51.1. Most of the other counties are smaller counties. There's Allen County that includes Lima in northwest Ohio, and Fulton County just west of Toledo.
Michael, let me stop you for just a second. Michael, let me just stop you for a second. Go back to that first county you mentioned and tell me what a significant increase in turnout. You mentioned that the Bush vote was up, but what does a significant increase in turnout in that area bode?
Well, what it bodes is that you've got evidence that that both sides have sought to turn out their voters and have had some success in that.
So that's not an area where if one side or the other, if you get a big turnout, it definitely helps one side or the other more?
It doesn't, but what it does say is that the Democrats are not the only party that's been getting a big turnout, because they have some target neighborhoods in Lake County where they obviously could target voters, union members. Union membership is big there. So the story in these counties and the story in the other 8 counties that I've been isolating, in all of them, the turnout was up between 6%, as much as 24% in rural Fayette County, which is right next door to Clinton County, where George W. Bush appeared on the morning of Monday, yesterday morning, last event of the campaign. And the Republican percentage is up in 8 of the 9 counties.
The Republican percentage is up, and overall turnout is it up? Is it being up suggest an advantage Republican for you, or
it suggests an advantage Republican, but the Democrats will try and get their turnout up, and we haven't gotten figures in any extensive part from most of the big counties except Franklin County, which includes Columbus. The latest numbers show Kerry leading 50 to 48, a narrow lead, but we don't know what parts of Franklin County are being reported and what parts aren't, so we can't really draw a conclusion about the overall results in Franklin County. We've got 32% of the precincts left to report.
All right, Michael, this is very interesting stuff. Keep coming back to us whenever you can. In the meantime, we're going to take a break here, but before we do, we want to give you a sense of what's happening in New Hampshire, where the race remains too close to call, and at this hour there, the 2 candidates are separated by something on the order of 400 votes. So here we go again. Stay tuned, more to come. you can see from that screen we just showed you, some big states are closing at 11 o'clock. California, Oregon, Washington. Those states, of course, are big and important, but they are not swing states. California has been really conceded, as it has been in so many elections over the years, to the Democrats. The president thought at one time he might have a chance in Oregon, but I believe, Fred, correct me if I'm wrong about this, the thinking on that changed late in the campaign, and Oregon was thought to be gone, right? So
yes.
we may be able to tell you something about that stuff when those three states, when the polls close here in about 16 minutes or so. But even if we were able to call all of them in the direction we think people think they'll go, it wouldn't move the ball very much. It would fatten Senator Kerry's electoral total. California alone would give him another 55 electoral votes. So we can look for that race with Bush up ahead by 81 electoral votes at this hour of the night. You probably think, wow, he's well on his way. But California is likely to give him 55. And between those three states, I can't add them all up really quickly, but it gives you a sense of how close the race really is at this hour. One
interesting factor here about what Mike Barone was reporting is one, a surge in turnout all over the place, and this was basically Republican places.
Well, I thought he thought they were mixed places.
Well, actually, Lake County is a mixed place. What it suggests is that in those Republican precincts, we had a growth of 1 or 2%.
Republican voters.
What both sides were doing was targeting their own voters, and what the Republicans were doing in these other 8 counties that Michael was referring to is turning out their people. They were concentrating on Republican stronghold counties and trying to boost those the turnout in those counties, and they seem to have been able to do it. Now, what we don't know is whether the Democrats were as successful or more successful in turning out in their stronghold counties.
The phone call I got during the break, that annoying ring on the cell phone, was a Republican who's done many not part of the Bush campaign, who's done many statewide races in Florida, who was just poring over the data there. He now thinks there's a 75% chance Bush wins Florida. Clean.
Really?
Yes. He thinks the numbers.
How independent is he of the campaign?
Totally independent,
but he's a Republican. He wants Bush to win.
He wants Bush to win, but he has been pessimistic actually because he's because he's been looking at the data and been worried about Bush's prospects. He remains very worried about Ohio, but he's not an expert on Ohio. He's done many statewide races in Florida. He's been going over the counties, and of course that vote is getting pretty high up. Was it in the 85% range in our ticker, I think, and I think he thinks there's. Not certain, but he thinks Bush could win that, and beyond, 537 votes could actually get a clean victory in Florida. In which case, then everything would hinge on Ohio,
Upper Midwest,
Ohio,
Wisconsin,
and then Michigan and Wisconsin, Iowa, New Mexico, Nevada on the other side.
The wonder at this hour, in some sense, it seems to me, is why we haven't been able to call Pennsylvania. And I suspect, based on what we've seen, is people may, that was a state where the exit polling showed Kerry just having the walkover. Is that it's a vote total problem.
But also it looks like Philadelphia must have come in early because there were these monstrous Democratic majorities, both for the Senate and presidential race. And as we watch it on the ticker, the Republicans are gradually catching up. It looks like Specter's going to catch up to half, I would guess, in the Senate race. Whether Bush can catch Kerry, I'm a little more doubtful. But it's the raw vote is always interesting to watch and less predictable than you think.
Well, the raw vote. Look at the raw vote in New Hampshire. It's 50-50. Now this was expected to be a certain Kerry state. Now it may turn out to be. The exit polls certainly indicated that it would be a Kerry state, and all the polls indicated there would be a Kerry state. It's right next to Massachusetts. A lot of new voters there have moved from Massachusetts into New Hampshire.
The state used to be a really bedrock Republican state. It's trended Republican, Democrat in recent elections. Although the president somewhat surprisingly carried it 4 years ago. That's one of those states that sort of by its political makeup now really is kind of a swing state where both parties have reasonable prospects.
But for it to be 50-50 at this stage is quite remarkable and worth watching for the rest until
it is. New Hampshire is a state. When I talked to Ken Mellon, the Bush campaign chairman, yesterday, I asked him, what is the most vulnerable Bush state? And he said New Hampshire. And so I agree with Mort. If it's 50-50 at this point, that's better than Bush expected it to be. Now, New Hampshire only has 4 electoral votes, but in a tight race like this, you want to keep all of them you have.
Right, exactly. Okay, now we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're about 12 minutes away from the polls closing on the West Coast. and we'll be able to, we hope, to tell you something about those 3 states. All of them blue states, all of them states Kerry needs to hold and is expected to. We'll be right back. We got a kind of a striking list here. It's almost 11 o'clock, and the race was said to come down to swing states. There's one too close to call. There's another one too close to call. Pennsylvania, yet another. We thought we were going to be able to call this early. Kerry appears well ahead, but we don't know what's in that. Too close to call. Similarly, New Hampshire, an important swing state. You wouldn't think that, little state, but Bush won it. Kerry thought he could. A lot of Bush people thought he could. Not able to call it. Michigan, same deal. Minnesota, this is a blue state. We thought Kerry would win this easily if he was going to have a big night. He may yet, but he hasn't done it yet. Wisconsin, president still ahead in the state that Al Gore won. President leading in Colorado, but we can't call it for him. Senator Kerry apparently still with a chance out there. New Mexico, same thing. That's a Kerry state. I mean, that's a Kerry Gore state. Arizona, this is a state the president won. We're not able to call it for him. Iowa, same thing. That's another swing state. Basically, this is a catalog of swing states. Nevada, that isn't really a swing state. The president, you would think, would be ahead there. We don't know what's going on. It looks like no data. Same thing with Montana. That looks like very limited data as well. We'll have to check with Michael Barone later to see what's holding us up in Montana and Nevada. Those 2 mountain states is the question of data. So as we wait here for, we've had an interesting night, and we've got some results from the Senate. It would appear, I think it's fair to say, that the Democrats' chances of capturing the Senate have been diminished slightly not because there's been many switches. We did have Georgia switch. We've had South Carolina switch.
And it looks like with David Vitter doing well in over 50% in Louisiana, that might switch.
Be a switch.
Of course, and Democrats have only picked up the one state.
In Illinois. And that, of course, is Illinois, where Barack Obama, who's part of whose acceptance speech, the thank you portion, we saw. We also saw his wife give a very spirited introduction of him, and so it's now 2-1 in terms of switches.
Well, 3-1 if you count Louisiana, which we haven't declared. But look what Democrats are still defending. They're defending South Dakota, which is a toss-up, where Tom Daschle is running for re-election. Florida, which is an open seat where Betty Castor and Mel Martinez are tied. And then North Carolina, where Richard Burr is running ahead, the Republican running ahead. And Democrats, if they're going to win the Senate, which I think is virtually impossible now, have to break through in Colorado, which is the latest, I forget the latest there, and Alaska, where they have a very good chance of picking up a Republican seat.
So what would that
when you mix it all together,
Fred,
it has them winning, Republicans gaining 2 or 3 seats, I think, or maybe 1 or 2.
Yeah, and it depends on what happens in South Dakota. If John Thune beats, the Republican beats Tom Daschle, the minority leader, that would...
Don't you increasingly get the idea that that's an Indian reservation deal, and that will tell the tale in that state?
Yeah, but the Indian reservations have been places where there's been intense conflict, over between lawyers, not the Indians versus the
Cowboys.
The Cowboys anymore. But the Republicans thought this time that they could really begin to challenge what they thought was fraudulent voting in the Indian reservations, and whether that's true or not, there are platoons of lawyers out there.
Well, what we know happened so far is that Republicans, in what they said was an effort to check authenticity of voters, were checking license plate numbers and making on Indian reservation voting areas and following people to their cars and checking the license plate numbers to see if these were people who were from the Indian reservation or they were from some other state or somewhere, and that got shot down by a judge.
Well,
who was told not to do that, and apparently there wasn't any of that going on today.
Well, apparently it's also illegal in South Dakota.
We've got a call we can make. This is not a surprise, but it's an important state. Senator Kerry, we project, has won the state of Pennsylvania. Now, that is an Al Gore state, one he had been expected to win all along, where the president had made a showing and had been shown close in the polls. We're not able to characterize the margin there, but we do now project the state of Pennsylvania for John Kerry. That is the first of the big Rust Belt states that we've been able to call. We've also called New Jersey for Senator Kerry, and those two results, New Jersey went early. And we thought that was going to be indicative. And I think also all of us sitting at this desk tonight rather expected that Pennsylvania might soon go the same way, and it didn't. And the fact that it's this late takes some of the punch out of it as at least psychologically as a. Now, in North Carolina, this is an important race here. This is Richard Burr, the congressman challenging for the seat that had been held by John Edwards. We project now, Fox News projects that Richard Burr will win over a very well-qualified challenger, the former Clinton chief of staff, Erskine Bowles, successful businessman, very popular figure in that state, very widely known, ran before, lost, of course, to Elizabeth Dole. We're going to take a break now, but we're beginning maybe to pick up a little steam here. Stay tuned. Well, we got a minute here before the 11 o'clock poll closings, which include those 3 states on the very west coast, plus Hawaii, and I guess Idaho closes the polls out there. And we'll be able to say something about some of those states, and we know you're going to want to hear it. In the meantime, we've been discussing, we did call the North Carolina Senate race, that's kind of a big deal, even though it's not it is a switch into the Republican column, with Burr having won that, and it takes away, I think, one of the places where Democrats had come to hope they might win. And Burr looked like he had faded a little in.
No, he hadn't faded, Britt. What happened is he had a very late starting campaign. He spent all his money late, and for a number of months, Erskine Bowles was ahead by 10 points in every poll. And then Burr, a former defensive back at Wake Forest when he was in college, actually, and then a House of Representatives.
11 o'clock, Fred. Hate to interrupt. California for president. Too close to call. State of Washington for president. Too close. Oregon, same deal. Hawaii for president. This is a state the Republicans have been going after with some hope, still close to call. However, we can give you Idaho. No surprise at all there. That's as red a state as you'll probably find. The president, big winner there. California U.S. Senate, Barbara Boxer, no surprise, incumbent Democratic senator, wins. We project in the U.S. Senate seat there, that's too close to call as well. That's George Nethercutt running for the Senate. He's a congressman who was elected in the Republican sweep in '94, and he upended the then House Speaker, Tom Foley. He had a promise to be term limited, which he proceeded to break, and now he wants to be elevated to the Senate, and we find that race too close to call. There's an Idaho Senate race, I'm sorry, I mentioned that, and the Hawaii Senate race, I believe we're going to be able to project that. Yeah, Daniel Inouye, the veteran Republican Democratic senator, he's been there since a very long time. This must be about his this must be his sixth or seventh term, right? He was there forever. I mean, he was there a long time. Remains popular. And joining us now to discuss these Senate results, among other things, is the current Senate Majority Leader, who looks increasingly tonight as if he will still be the Senate Majority Leader, Bill Frist of Tennessee. Senator, your reaction to what you've seen?
Well, Britt, it feels pretty good. You know, the presidential race, I'm cautiously optimistic like everybody, focusing on Ohio. But as you know, I'm in the Mansfield room at the United States Senate now, and from the Senate perspective, things look real good. I was predicting that we'd pick up 1 net seat. Right now, we have 51 Republicans in the United States Senate. And if things go well, we could have a clean sweep of the South. That's North Carolina, South Carolina. Florida is way too close now. We may not know for some period period of time. But Louisiana looks fantastic. I didn't think we'd get above 50%, and of course Georgia, so we're doing pretty well.
Well, you are. Talk to me about Louisiana a little bit. I mean, I don't think all the vote has been counted down there, and your candidate was up over, what, 50, David Vitter, the congressman, was up over 50%, but enough so that you can say with certainty tonight, I mean, you feel like he's got it or not?
Yet. No, not yet, but I'll tell you, nobody anticipated that. Right now, the advertising was very effective. He ran a great campaign there, very organized, very disciplined campaign. But most people thought it would be a runoff. It almost always is, and as you know, there's not much history of a Republican senator there. So it's too early to tell, but clearly he's won tonight, and if not, he'll win that final election if we don't get above 50% later. But we got a shot, and deep inside, a little voice is telling me he may pull it off tonight.
Well, let me ask you if you got a little voice telling you anything about another race, probably the most watched non-presidential race in the country, and that, of course, is the Senate election campaign out in South Dakota, where the current Democratic leader, Senator Daschle, is utterly deadlocked there. They're separated now by less than 1,000 votes, about 700 votes between them. Congressman Thune ahead. Only 42% of the precincts are in out there. I don't know where that stuff is or anything about the Indian reservation tabulation out there. What can you tell us, if anything, about that?
I haven't looked at county by county, so I don't know what is outstanding. I can tell you that over the last 10 days, this race has been almost exactly the way the race was 2 years ago when John Thune ran. Less than 1,000 votes. As you know, 2 years ago, he lost by less than 500 votes. This time, I think he's going to win by around 1,000 votes.
Why do you say that?
It's too early.
Why do you say that?
It's really just feel. Right now, it is dead even, and that's a prediction. Don't know which counties are outstanding. It is less than 1,000 votes now, and it's going to be decided by less than 1,000 votes. Right now, we're a tiny bit ahead.
Now, let me get what you're hearing from sources out in Ohio, if anything. What do you hear from out there, Senator?
Well, you know, I'm going to be very cautious there because I think the United States of America's attention is on that state right now. Right now, as you probably reported, in some of the areas, the reporting shows that President Bush is doing a lot better than he did 4 years ago. And again, some of that's hearsay, some of it's actual reporting that's going on. If that's the case, as we progress over the next couple of hours, I think that we're going to see a win in Ohio, which would, in my mind, mean that the president, again, I'm going to be cautiously optimistic, but that the president would win re-election.
What's your sense? It took us a while to call it. Pennsylvania having gone to Senator Kerry, it looks like that might be a reasonable margin for Senator Kerry. Does that suggest anything to you about any of the other states?
No, I don't think so. I think the general feeling was it was going to be close, it was going to lean Kerry, and it looks like that it's gone Kerry.
In recent days, what had your colleague Senator Santorum been saying to you about that? I know at one time, some months back, Rick Santorum was bullish on the president's prospects out there. What did Republicans in the state have to say in recent days?
Well, you know, I talk to Rick every day, and he and Arlen Specter were very optimistic. We knew it was going to be a challenge. There's so much geographic variation in Pennsylvania, which we all know. But coming in over the last couple of days, we knew we were a little bit behind, and therefore I think that ultimately that was translated to a win for Kerry.
All right. Senator Frist, pleasure to have you, and a pleasure to have your expertise.
Great to be with you. We're looking to pick up a couple of seats here tonight.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist, we can give you a result now for president in Washington, a projection there that Senator Kerry will win that. That a blue state was expected and needed to win by the senator. Still not a single shift. Let's check in on the little state, the Granite State, that has become so critical a state in all of these discussions tonight. It is close as it can be up there. Let's check in with Michael Barone for some thoughts and information on what we're seeing there. Michael?
Well, it's New Hampshire is the Granite State, and both the candidates are trying to chip away at it in all its cities, towns, locations, plantations, and gores, which are units of local government and election reporting in New Hampshire. 4 years ago, this was a 48-47 Bush state. Right now, we're showing tabulated vote with 50% for John Kerry, 49% for George W. Bush. And looking at the town-by-town and city-by-city returns, Britt, I don't find any clear pattern here. You can look at, you can look at Manchester, where Bush is up 1, Kerry is up 2 from 4 years before, or Nashua, where Bush is up 3, Kerry is not up from 4 years before. And then you turn around and see something like the college town of Keene in the Southwest, where Bush is down 1 and Kerry's up 7. That was a hotbed for its Vermont neighbor, Howard Dean, in the primary period in New Hampshire. No clear picture on how New Hampshire's spinning. Some of the places, Manchester, as last I saw, 8 out of 12 precincts, wards have reported. Nashua, 8 out of 9, but the city of Portsmouth, left-wing leaning, is out. So no telling where it's going to go.
So this lead that Senator Kerry has here, percentage point, you don't consider to be meaningful at this point?
I would not predict on the basis of what we've seen here. What it isn't like is the early exit polls that showed John Kerry with a big margin. Okay, the exit poll takes another hit. All right, Michael, we'll be back to you soon. Thanks very much. I'm sorry. We're now projecting in Washington State that Pennsylvania Senate, we have a projection there. This took a while. Senator Specter, the incumbent Republican, we believe a winner. That's not a surprise. Patty Murray, the incumbent senator there, winning out over George Nethercutt, whose term has finally, it seems, been limited. Let's go to Greta Van Susteren for word on the ballot initiatives, where the question of stem cell research is at issue.
That's right, Britt. In the state of California, the initiative was whether or not there should be a constitutional right in California to conduct stem cell research, as well as the authorization of a $3 billion bond. And we are projecting that the state of California is now voted in favor of that stem cell research. Other important legal news in the state of Florida. The ACLU has now filed a lawsuit having to do with the election down there, and Ken Gross is with me. Ken, important lawsuit down there. Tell me what it's about and the impact it could have.
Well, in Broward County, Palm Beach County, familiar counties, 2,500 ballots in one state, 55 in one county, 5,500 in another, were not put in the mail until Saturday. The people that applied for their ballots on time to vote absentee, they're not going to be able to return them by today, so they're asking that the deadline be delayed until November 12th, which is the deadline for getting absentee ballots if you're mailing them in from out of country. It could be important. Not a lot of votes, but Florida is still too close to call.
So we're beginning to see this, Judge. The lawsuits are flowing in, which could actually have an impact on the outcome.
We are. Governor Bush, Jeb Bush, has complained for many years that he has been the target of the ACLU, and they have sued him many, many times. But if the allegations in the ACLU lawsuit are correct, it is inconceivable and unforgivable that the state would wait a month to return someone's absentee ballot. I think the courts will extend the deadline for the return of those absentee ballots to November 12th, which means we might not know the outcome of Florida for some time.
Ken, is there any sort of precedent for this sort of thing where the election people wait a month to send out the absentee ballots so the people can't get them in time? Or is there any sort of justification, any excuse, anything that would justify the late mailing?
Well, certainly glitches have occurred, and they always get magnified in these close situations. I see no justification, though, on this. The magnifying glass has been on Florida now throughout this process, and this is not an acceptable oversight.
Judge, you were a former judge, a sitting judge, always a judge. If you were confronted with this, ballots were put in the mail on Saturday, and they were supposed to be in by today. All they want is till November 12th, so the ballots get.
There's a tendency on the part of all judges to want to side in favor of those who are innocent victims of government mistakes and allow the votes to count. But it is a rare judge who is confronted with a case where the outcome might affect the identity of the next president of the United States. I would think the safe bet would be to let those absentee ballots come in and count them. It's not a Republican or a Democrat thing in this particular instance. In fact, sometimes the Republicans believe that more of the absentee ballots are theirs.
And of course, the importance is whether or not what the margin is between the two candidates when we finish counting, at least tonight. Back to you, Britt.
Thanks very much. We have a House race to call. It's an interesting one because this is one of these cases where redistricting put two incumbents against each other. And let's take a look. This is the 32nd Congressional District in Texas. Texas, and we project that Pete Sessions, the Republican, is the winner over Martin Frost. Martin Frost, a member of the Democratic hierarchy in that state. He's also been the head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in the past. Very skilled politician there, and we project that his congressional career, at least for the moment, is over tonight. Republican Pete Sessions, the winner. We're going to take a break now, but as we do, let's take a look at the nationwide state picture in terms of red and blue states and see if we can spot in there anywhere a red state that has gone blue. No. Any blue states red? No, not yet. So everything is in form. The election is still very much out there. We got much more to come. Stay with us.